What if the greatest life ever recorded is also the one most shrouded in silence, its most formative years veiled in an impenetrable mystery? For centuries, believers and skeptics alike have marveled at the enigmatic figure of Jesus of Nazareth, a man whose profound words reshaped civilizations and whose timeless parables still whisper across the ages. His birth is celebrated annually with tender nativity scenes, a familiar tableau of humble beginnings. His childhood, however, is marked by a single remarkable story: his precocious teaching in the temple at the tender age of 12. And then, abruptly, nothing. A silence so profound it echoes louder than any spoken word, leaving an astonishing void in the narrative. From the ages of 12 to 30, a span of nearly 2 decades, the canonical Gospels tell us absolutely nothing about his life. It is a chronological gap so vast, one could metaphorically walk a continent through it. This profound silence feels less like an accidental oversight and more like a deliberate erasure. Did the ancient chroniclers genuinely not know what transpired, or did they perhaps choose not to disclose it? Was this period deemed unimportant for their theological purposes, or was it, conversely, deemed too dangerous or inconvenient to reveal? History has an odd, almost perverse way of leaving gaping spaces precisely where we most crave detail and insight. In the biographies of kings, we meticulously trace the dates of their pivotal battles, the names of their consorts, and the lineage of the heirs they left behind. In the lives of great philosophers, we can often trace their pupils, pore over their letters, and analyze their intellectual contradictions. But here, at the very epicenter of the most influential story ever told, we encounter a chasm of absence. It is as though the life of Jesus is a precious manuscript with crucial pages torn away, lost to time. The narrative ink breaks mid-sentence, and when the words miraculously resume, we find ourselves suddenly before a grown man, standing on the banks of the Jordan River, fully prepared to embark upon his transformative ministry. The transition is jarring, leaving the reader with a profound sense of missing context. Between the boy who astounded temple elders and the Messiah who preached salvation lies a deep and compelling mystery, a silence too deliberate to simply ignore. This intriguing absence has a name, one often whispered among scholars: the missing years or the lost years of Jesus. But the very phrase itself is somewhat misleading, for nothing truly vanishes from the intricate tapestry of history. Stories merely drift, they survive in tantalizing fragments, in the forgotten corners of ancient manuscripts, or preserved by chance in the dusty archives of distant monasteries. When something is conspicuously missing from a historical record, it is often because it has been intentionally hidden. And if hidden, then perhaps it was concealed for a very specific, compelling reason. Some scholars argue that the Gospels were never intended to be comprehensive biographies, that their purpose was to condense his story, highlighting only what was deemed most significant theologically. Yet theology alone cannot adequately explain the startling sharpness of this narrative cut, the abrupt way the story vaults from boyhood to baptism with absolutely nothing in between. Could it be that something inconvenient, perhaps even controversial, was deliberately hidden from public view, that journeys too vast, or teachings too foreign to the nascent Christian movement, were quietly set aside by those who meticulously pen the story we know today? The profound mystery of these missing years has haunted historians, mystics, and spiritual seekers for countless centuries, fueling endless speculation. In the shadows of this profound silence, speculation blooms with vibrant intensity. Some contend that Jesus remained in Nazareth, quietly laboring as a carpenter, absorbing wisdom through the crucible of ordinary life and daily toil. Others, however, insist that he could not possibly have returned with such extraordinary authority, such unparalleled depth of vision and spiritual insight, unless he had ventured far beyond the familiar hills of Galilee, experiencing worlds unknown to his humble beginnings. For the world of his time was far from a closed circle. It was a vibrant, interconnected tapestry. Great roads stretched like vital arteries across the land, carrying not just goods and commerce, but also ideas, diverse religions, and compelling stories. Caravans moved ceaselessly eastward toward the exotic lands of Persia and India, westward toward the mighty empires of Rome and Spain, south into the ancient civilizations of Africa, and north toward the vast steppes. A restless, inquisitive spirit could easily follow those well-worn paths and be carried into worlds utterly foreign, brimming with new knowledge and experiences. Could this profound silence in the Gospels be not an emptiness at all, but rather a testament to extensive travel and self-discovery? Could the boy who so dazzlingly impressed the elders in Jerusalem have matured into a young man who sought wisdom under strange foreign skies, in lands where his name was never explicitly written, but where his transformative shadow was undeniably felt? Some apocryphal texts, deliberately excluded from the canonical scriptures, whisper tantalizingly of hidden teachings. Fragments that strongly suggest his profound wisdom came from far beyond the familiar confines of Judea. Intriguingly, in the 19th century, intrepid travelers to the remote regions of Tibet and Kashmir claim to have discovered ancient manuscripts describing a wandering holy man named Isa, whose life bore an uncanny resemblance to that of Jesus. Dismissed by some as mere fabrication or fanciful tales, yet passionately defended by others as suppressed historical memory, such accounts stir profound curiosity precisely because they occupy the same vast void left in our accepted scriptures. But whether those tantalizing fragments are ultimately proven true or not, the undeniable silence remains. It sits starkly between two unwavering poles of certainty: the remarkable child in the temple and the fully grown man at the Jordan River. In that expansive, unwritten space, imagination takes root, and history itself becomes wonderfully pliable. The missing years thus transform into a vast, inviting canvas where seekers, skeptics, and dreamers alike can paint their own vivid portraits of possibility. Could it be that this profound silence is not a flaw in the narrative, but rather an intentional invitation, an opening deliberately left blank, so that each successive generation might ask anew with fresh curiosity, what truly shaped the man who would ultimately reshape the entire world? For our journey into this enigma begins here, not with the comfort of certainty, but with an intriguing void, a silence that hums with boundless possibility, a critical gap in the narrative that may yet conceal hidden roads, forgotten scrolls, and profound buried truths. We will follow those whispers into the thrilling unknown, eager to uncover what lies beneath. Imagine holding a map not of mere geography, but of profound silence, a parchment where entire regions are left starkly blank, as if no hand dared to sketch their intricate contours. This is precisely how the Gospels treat the life of Jesus between his boyhood and his momentous 30th year. They simply turn the page and leave the intervening space empty. No roads drawn, no names of towns, no records of teachings, an unwritten, mysterious map. But while Scripture seemingly closed its eyes to this period, history itself was alive with ceaseless movement. In those very same years, the 1st century after Christ's birth, intricate trade routes crisscrossed the ancient world with astonishing vitality and breadth. From the bustling shores of the Mediterranean, caravans stretched tirelessly eastward into the heart of Arabia, Persia, and the distant lands of India. From ancient Egypt, ships sailed down the Red Sea, around the Horn of Africa, and deep into the Indian Ocean. From the vibrant cities of Damascus and Antioch, the vital arteries of commerce pulsed with the flow of silk, exotic spices, precious gems, and, crucially, transformative ideas. These routes were not mere exotic afterthoughts in the ancient world. They were the very highways of antiquity, facilitating global exchange. Roman coins have been unearthed in India, a testament to far-reaching connections. Exquisite Chinese silks found their way into Egyptian tombs, showcasing sophisticated trade networks. Persian incense perfumed temples as far away as Athens. This was emphatically no age of isolation, but rather one of ceaseless exchange and interconnectedness. The world was far larger than the Bible sometimes allows us to see, yet closer, in many ways, than we often imagine. Could a young, inquisitive seeker from Galilee have stepped onto these well-traveled roads? To some, the notion seems utterly impossible, an untraveled distance too vast to contemplate. Yet, the undeniable evidence of global connection in that era makes it not only possible, but profoundly plausible. Pilgrims traveled extensively, traders journeyed far and wide, and sages and wandering holy men were a common sight. Why, then, would he not have done the same? Picture it for a moment. The boy from Nazareth, now a young man, discreetly slipping into a caravan bound eastward, his feet pressing into the soft desert sands under a sky magnificently laced with stars. He would have undoubtedly heard foreign tongues, seen robes dyed in colors entirely unknown in Galilee, and smelled spices so pungent they seemed otherworldly. He would have walked beside men who spoke of philosophies older than Rome itself, of profound teachings that traced their lineage back not to Jerusalem, but to India or even beyond. If such a monumental journey indeed occurred, it was never explicitly marked on the canonical map of his life. But the absence of a written record is not by any means an absence of possibility. The unwritten map of his life is akin to a scroll rolled too tightly, its middle still sealed, patiently waiting for curious hands to pry it open and reveal its hidden contents. And perhaps that is precisely what seekers across centuries have endeavored to do. They gaze at the blankness and begin, cautiously, to sketch. Explorers in the 19th century drew faint lines toward the remote regions of Ladakh and Tibet. Mystics in the Middle Ages whispered of hidden travels into Persia. Even certain Islamic traditions sometimes describe Jesus as a wanderer, a prophet who roamed lands far beyond the familiar borders of Judea. It is easy, of course, to dismiss these captivating accounts as mere legends, wishful thinking spun across countless centuries. Yet, it is far harder to dismiss the profound silence itself. Why would the Gospels leave nearly 2 decades of a pivotal life utterly unspoken, unless there was something about them too complex, too inconvenient, or too wondrous to be reduced to a simple, digestible tale. Every ancient map has its legends, its mysterious margins where cartographers once famously wrote, "Here be dragons." The missing years of Jesus are precisely such a margin. The Gospels deliberately chose not to chart them. History, however, tantalizingly hints that they were full of movement, profound experiences, and transformative encounters. And between those two compelling realities, the scriptural silence and the historical hints, lies a mystery as deep and expansive as the vast deserts he may have crossed. Imagine turning the map slowly in your hands, its edges crisp with age, its center a fascinating blank. In that profound blankness lies our compelling invitation to wander, to follow the hidden roads, the ancient paths that might yet reveal where those lost years were truly spent. Galilee, to our modern imagination, often seems like a small, quiet corner of the ancient world, a serene lake, a few humble fishing villages, and rural hillsides where shepherds tended their flocks. But in the bustling first century, Galilee was anything but sealed away from the wider world. It lay strategically near vital crossroads, where trade roads converged and caravans constantly passed, where diverse languages mixed, and where a young man genuinely curious about the wider world could easily hear whispers of distant, exotic kingdoms. The Roman Empire, vast and relentlessly expanding, had transformed Judea into one of its numerous provinces. With conquest, inevitably came roads, those straight, meticulously engineered ribbons of stone that bound the immense empire together. Soldiers marched on them, yes, but so too did countless merchants. The caravans that trudged along these thoroughfares were not merely carrying grain or salt. They were also carrying the compelling stories of India, the advanced astronomy of Persia, and the ancient wisdom of Egypt. Every road, in essence, was a moving library, and every caravan a dynamic classroom for anyone willing to listen and learn. Could Jesus have been one of those eager listeners? Imagine him walking beyond Nazareth's narrow, familiar streets to meet travelers resting by a well. Perhaps he sat with a seasoned caravan master who spoke of silk merchants from the East, men who told captivating tales of golden statues and magnificent temples where monks wore vibrant saffron robes, hinting at a world far beyond the familiar horizons of Galilee. One might contemplate the possibility that he encountered narratives detailing the teachings of enlightened spiritual masters who advocated for profound compassion, emotional detachment from worldly concerns, and a disciplined path toward achieving profound inner tranquility. While a solitary instance of hearing such accounts could be mere coincidence, a recurrent exposure to these compelling philosophies might very well have ignited a profound spiritual yearning within him, especially given the multitude of available pathways for such an awakening. Towards the northern horizons, the ancient and historically significant Via Maris, often referred to as the Way of the Sea, unfurled itself as a vital commercial thoroughfare, extending its reach from the fertile lands of Egypt all the way to the venerable city of Damascus, and even further into distant territories. To the east, numerous pathways intricately connected with the outlying territories of ancient Mesopotamia and the vast empire of Persia, regions where the sacred flames within Zoroastrian fire temples were perpetually maintained, symbolizing an enduring spiritual tradition. Southern arteries of travel led directly into Egypt, a land renowned for its intellectual hubs, particularly in the grand libraries of Alexandria, where the sophisticated tenets of Greek philosophy harmoniously converged with the profound depths of Jewish mysticism, and, extending even further towards the distant Orient, lay the legendary Silk Road, a network of intricate pathways that meandered through vast arid deserts, scaled formidable mountain ranges, and linked verdant oases, ultimately reaching the ancient civilizations of India and China. One might be inclined to envision Jesus as strictly confined within the boundaries of his native village until the pivotal moment of his baptism. However, such an assumption of isolation appears distinctly incongruent with the dynamic reality of the world he inhabited during his formative years. Nazareth itself was situated in remarkably close proximity to Sepphoris, a thriving urban center experiencing significant development and reconstruction throughout his youth. A number of astute scholars have put forth the hypothesis that he might have been employed there as a skilled craftsman, possibly engaged in the construction of elaborate residences for affluent patrons. If this indeed were the case, he would have been exposed not merely to the conspicuous opulence indicative of Roman influence, but also to the remarkable diversity of cultures that such imperial power inevitably attracted. Coinage minted in distant, exotic realms, architectural designs that subtly incorporated both Hellenistic and distinctly Eastern motifs, and a constant stream of travelers who recounted tales of lands and experiences far beyond the conventional understanding of a typical villager. Consequently, the entirety of these observations compels one to ponder a more profound inquiry. What if Jesus did not merely passively overhear these compelling narratives and philosophical discussions? What if instead he actively chose to pursue them, embarking on a personal quest? The extensive network of roads, stretching in every direction, presented themselves as compelling invitations, akin to open portals to new experiences, and the conspicuous silence within the Gospels regarding these formative years inherently leaves ample room for the provocative possibility that he indeed ventured through them. For the individual who would, in due course, articulate profound insights concerning the delicate lilies adorning the fields and the humble sparrows soaring beneath the heavens, also appeared to possess an intimate understanding of the intricate complexities and profound truths pertaining to human suffering and the ultimate path to spiritual liberation. His profound parables, while undeniably grounded in the familiar agrarian and social landscapes of his homeland, Galilee, frequently evince a profound universality and timeless relevance that seems to transcend the provincial confines of his immediate environment. Could it be plausible that such expansive resonance was cultivated and enriched through extensive travels into distant lands, regions where ancient wisdom traditions and spiritual philosophies had been meticulously developed and refined over many centuries? The extensive network of roads stretching beyond the immediate borders of Galilee represented far more than solely a conduit for mercantile exchange. Instead, it functioned as a vibrant path of profound cultural encounter, an intricate tapestry of human interaction that skillfully bound together disparate and distant cultures into an interconnected, albeit often precariously balanced, global community. To traverse these ancient routes was to transcend not merely geographical distances, but also the very epistemological and spiritual frontiers that typically separated diverse human experiences. Thus, as one continues to contemplate this intriguing hypothesis, the conventional image of Galilee undergoes a profound transformation. It ceases to be perceived as a secluded hamlet perpetually enshrined in its religious observances, and instead emerges as a significant threshold, a veritable doorway to the wider world. Through this very doorway, it is conceivable that a young man once passed, an individual whose extended period of unrecorded silence would later reverberate as profound instruction and timeless wisdom. A man who might have journeyed extensively before eventually returning to the sacred waters of the Jordan. The road extending beyond Galilee was undeniably present, utterly accessible, and resonating with the vibrant echoes of distant cultures from the East. Regardless of whether he actually embarked upon this particular journey, the interpretative vacuum created by the Gospels, silence compels us to engage in thoughtful speculation. And within the realm of such profound contemplation, the potential narrative of his early travels truly begins to unfold. Nazareth, a modest community nestled precariously on the undulating hills of Galilee, frequently appears to modern observers as an isolated and remarkably unsophisticated provincial locale. Such initial perceptions, however, can be profoundly misleading. During the 1st century, Nazareth was situated in far closer proximity to the world's principal conduits of global interaction than one might intuitively assume. Merely a brief journey separated it from Sepphoris, a flourishing metropolis and pivotal urban center where numerous Roman roads converged, and whose bustling markets resounded with the rich linguistic tapestry of Greek, Aramaic, Latin, and even the distinct cadences of Persian. For the son of a carpenter, such advantageous geographical proximity presented a tantalizing prospect for exploration and intellectual engagement. The region was characterized by a ceaseless movement of traders, devout pilgrims, and erudite scholars, all in perpetual transit across the diverse landscape of the Levant. From the illustrious city of Alexandria in Egypt to the significant urban hub of Antioch in Syria, these ancient routes throbbed with an incessant flow of goods, ideas, and human interaction. These were by no means obscure or seldom used byways, but rather extensively well-trodden roads along which majestic caravans, laden with precious silk, aromatic frankincense, exquisite ivory, and dazzling jewels, traversed numerous villages, utilizing them as vital waypoints on their extensive journeys toward distant, beckoning horizons. Should a young man have felt compelled by an insatiable wanderlust to embark upon such a journey, he would certainly not have found himself in isolation. The fabled Silk Road, that legendary artery of cultural and commercial exchange binding the civilizations of the East and West, was already flourishing and highly active for many centuries prior to the era of Jesus. It constituted not merely a singular, defined thoroughfare, but rather a complex and interwoven network. Arduous camel trails snaking through vast, unforgiving deserts, treacherous mountain passes leading into the ancient lands of Persia. Maritime voyages undertaken by ships across the expansive Indian Ocean, and numerous inland caravan routes where weary merchants would pause to rest, offer their prayers, and exchange narratives and cultural insights with fellow travelers. This extensive road network served a purpose far more profound than being exclusively dedicated to the transportation of material commodities. It was equally a dynamic conduit for the transmission of groundbreaking ideas, advanced mathematical concepts, intricate astronomical observations, sophisticated medical knowledge, and diverse philosophical schools of thought, all of which journeyed alongside the merchants who conveyed them. One might vividly imagine Jesus in his 20s, perhaps possessing an inquisitive spirit and a restless disposition, yearning for experiences transcending the confines of his carpenter's tools. It is conceivable that he departed from Nazareth and allied himself with a caravan heading eastward toward Damascus, its magnificent camels rhythmically undulating beneath the substantial burdens of exquisite Persian rugs and aromatic Indian spices. It is plausible that he attentively absorbed the conversations of seasoned merchants, who spoke of enlightened spiritual leaders in India who expounded upon the profound virtue of boundless compassion, or of profound mystics in Persia, who articulated doctrines concerning the eternal, sacred flame, and even of devout seekers in Tibet, who pursued spiritual liberation through rigorous practices of contemplative meditation. The ancient road, therefore, functioned as far more than a mere thoroughfare for commercial transactions. It was, in essence, a pathway to profound personal and spiritual metamorphosis. One might reasonably inquire whether the young Galilean could indeed have traversed the immense distances required to reach such far-flung lands. Critics often contend that the sheer geographical expanses were insurmountable, and the inherent perils of such an undertaking too formidable. Nevertheless, a multitude of individuals successfully undertook comparable journeys throughout history. Merchants, devout pilgrims, and earnest spiritual seekers routinely crossed thousands of miles. The discovery of Roman coins unearthed in various sites across India unequivocally demonstrated the extensive reach of Mediterranean travelers into the subcontinent. Similarly, Buddhist statues found in the intellectual hub of Alexandria served as tangible evidence of how Eastern philosophies and artistic traditions had already permeated the Western world. The Silk Road, therefore, was no mere figment of historical conjecture. It was a tangible and vibrant aspect of antiquity, a well-established network of global connection. Furthermore, the conspicuous lacuna within the Gospels concerning these years creates an interpretive space for intriguing possibilities. Could Jesus, perhaps, have followed the extensive network of roads eastward, venturing into regions where profound spiritual traditions had already been evolving and maturing for many centuries? Indeed, some later oral and written traditions, particularly those preserved in the mountainous regions of Kashmir and Ladakh, circulate compelling narratives suggesting precisely this. These accounts speak of an enigmatic foreign instructor, a compassionate healer known by the name Isa, who reportedly moved among the impoverished populace and imparted lessons of profound kindness, genuine humility, and a steadfast rejection of material wealth. Should their ancient scrolls prove authentic, they describe journeys and teachings that are strikingly congruent with what would subsequently be recorded within the canonical Gospels. If such accounts hold historical veracity, then the extensive road stretching from Nazareth to the fabled Silk Road was far more than a simple function of a mere physical thoroughfare. It served instead as a crucial conduit through which diverse wisdom traditions converged and harmoniously intermingled, ultimately producing a transcendent and universally resonant message that would echo profoundly across countless centuries. Moreover, even if these compelling narratives persist solely as captivating legends, the very contemplation of this possibility inherently invites us to reevaluate our perception of Nazareth, seeing it not as a definitive endpoint, but rather as a profound beginning. Within this revised perspective, the modest village transforms into a significant point of departure, a threshold from whose elevated hills one could gaze outward toward the ancient city of Damascus, onward to the vast empire of Persia, further still toward the spiritual heartland of India, and indeed, far beyond. In this light, the conspicuous silence within the Gospels regarding these formative years becomes less akin to an inexplicable chasm of information and more like an intriguing portal purposefully left ajar. And perhaps Jesus, a spirit characterized by profound restlessness and an earnest quest for deeper understanding, indeed walked through that very doorway, venturing into the expansive global landscape, undertaking a momentous journey from Nazareth to the legendary Silk Road. This significant journey, naturally, would remain conspicuously absent from the formal scriptural narratives of the Gospels. However, it is conceivable that its memory was meticulously safeguarded within hushed oral traditions carried eastward, perhaps even hidden within ancient scrolls, and indelibly imprinted upon the collective recollections of distant lands that cherish the memory of a wandering teacher whose enigmatic origins lay far to the western reaches of the world, far removed from the familiar landscapes of Galilee, at elevated altitudes amidst the winding pathways of the majestic Himalayas, and deep within the secluded sanctuaries of monasteries, where the ethereal fragrance of incense perpetually lingers among the ancient rafters. Venerable ancient chronicles discreetly recount the existence of an enlightened master originating from the Western world. They refer to him by the name Isa. His appellation reverberates with a subtle resonance, much like a distant bell chiming in an unfamiliar realm, carrying a sound that is simultaneously familiar in its spiritual essence and yet strikingly foreign in its cultural context. During the latter part of the 19th century, a notable Russian explorer, Nicholas Notovich, asserted his discovery of these very accounts within an isolated monastic institution in the Tibetan region of Ladakh. He meticulously described ancient texts that depicted the young Isa embarking on an extensive eastward journey, dedicating himself to the diligent study of the venerable scriptural canons of the Vedas, receiving instruction from the esteemed sacerdotal figures of India, and selflessly imparting lessons of profound compassion to the marginalized and lowly. These intriguing narratives portray a foreign teacher who vociferously condemned the rigid social stratification inherent in caste systems, consistently aligned himself unequivocally with the economically disadvantaged, and consequently provoked considerable displeasure among the Brahminical elite by audaciously challenging their established ecclesiastical authority. Immediately following their publication, Notovich's assertions were promptly discounted and challenged by numerous skeptics. They leveled charges of deliberate fabrication against him, suggesting he was merely concocting imaginative narratives from mere vestiges of hearsay and fragmented rumors. His compelling narrative, however, steadfastly refused to fade into obscurity. Subsequently, other intrepid travelers independently reported hearing corresponding accounts of Isa circulating among the revered lamas of Tibet. Even if the specific elements of these various narratives might have diverged somewhat, their fundamental essence endured. The enduring memory of a significant figure from the Western world who traversed the ancient roads of India and bequeathed teachings that harmonized deeply with the spiritual tenets of both Hindu and Buddhist traditions. The profound question thus arises: could these ancient texts potentially serve as an authentic repository for the recollection of Jesus during his unaccounted-for period, often referred to as his missing years. If indeed this proves to be the case, the potential ramifications are profoundly remarkable. For within the narratives, one perceives a unique cultural and spiritual nexus, a veritable bridge between the East and the West, the son of a Galilean carpenter articulating profound principles of mercy and compassion within the very spiritual heartland of the Buddha's teachings. A sagacious teacher whose timeless words reverberated across two distinct and geographically separated civilizations, divided by vast deserts and formidable mountain ranges. And yet, even when divested of definitive historical corroboration, the congruencies between these traditions are remarkably compelling. Both the revered Sermon on the Mount and the profound Buddhist Dhammapada distinctly elevate the virtue of profound humility. Both scriptural collections advocate for the cultivation of boundless compassion, even towards adversaries. Furthermore, both consistently exhort individuals towards a profound spiritual detachment from material possessions and worldly riches. Could such remarkable alignment be attributed to a mere happenstance, a serendipitous coincidence of independent spiritual revelation? Perhaps. Or alternatively, could it be that Jesus himself assiduously assimilated the profound insights of Eastern philosophical traditions before eventually returning to Galilee to represent these truths with fresh vigor and local resonance? The enigma becomes even more intricate when one considers the dynamic manner in which narrative traditions were disseminated across vast distances. Caravans traversing the legendary Silk Road were not exclusively laden with luxury commodities such as silk and exotic spices. They also served as conduits for the transmission of compelling narratives, profound teachings, and historical accounts. An esteemed spiritual figure from the region of Judea could readily transform into the central protagonist of captivating fireside retellings within a distant monastery hall. Over the passage of time, it is plausible that specific elements of the narrative might undergo gradual modification and personal appellations could be subtly transmuted, yet the fundamental essence of the recollection would persist and endure. It is conceivable that Isa was not, in fact, Jesus himself, but rather a profound manifestation of how diverse cultures re-envisioned and appropriated the universal, archetypal representation of a sacred instructor. Or perhaps, even more compellingly and controversially, Isa and Jesus were indeed identical in historical personage. To embark upon the exploration of these profound inquiries is, ultimately, to traverse the expansive landscape of unanswered questions and historical lacuna, a journey through the profound silence of unrecorded history. No canonical biblical texts or recognized historical accounts provide any information regarding the alleged travels of Jesus during his undocumented formative years. However, the enduring existence of various narratives within the ancient traditions of India and Tibet strongly suggests a deeper historical tapestry than mere chance encounters. These narratives represent faint echoes from the annals of time, intimating that the silent period of Jesus' life might have been spent in regions far removed from the familiar terrain of Galilee. Should Jesus indeed have traversed the ancient pathways of India, his role would have transcended that of a mere student. He would have also emerged as a profound spiritual instructor. These historical chronicles depict him as an individual who fearlessly confronted societal injustices, uplifted the downtrodden, and miraculously healed the ailing with a simple touch. Such details are not alien to our understanding of his character. Rather, They are striking reverberations of the Gospel's own descriptions, transposed into a distinct linguistic framework, a different cultural milieu, and an earlier epoch. The profound silence surrounding these undocumented years now begins to resonate with an intriguing depth. It is conceivable that his time in India served as a crucible where he refined the boundless compassion that would ultimately define his subsequent ministry. Perhaps it was in this distant land that he first articulated the profound wisdom that would one day emanate from the Mount of Beatitudes. Alternatively, this phenomenon might simply reflect the universal human tendency for diverse cultures to narrate similar archetypal stories, thereby weaving parallel threads of spiritual wisdom into a grand, interconnected human narrative. While these ancient Indian texts, replete with their enigmatic whispers, may never achieve the definitive authentication required by rigorous historical scholarship, their very existence serves as a potent reminder that the world inhabited by Jesus was far more expansive than the circumscribed boundaries of Judea. Within the hallowed shadows of Ladakh's ancient monasteries, preserved on the delicate pages of manuscripts hidden from Western eyes for centuries, resides a compelling suggestion that the revered Messiah of Galilee might also have been a devoted pilgrim of the mystical East. High above the world, where the very air becomes thin and the majestic peaks of mountains majestically pierce the azure sky, subtle whispers of ancient lore persist within the secluded monasteries of Tibet. Within their solemn, shadowed chambers, where the gentle glow of butter lamps flickers softly and sacred chants rise like rhythmic waves against the profound silence, legends speak reverently of a distinguished foreign sage. These narratives portray him as a man of Western origin, clad in humble, unadorned cloth, who engaged in profound theological debates with learned monks beneath the soft, ambient illumination of candlelight. These tales, though appearing fragile and sometimes ephemeral, yet remarkably tenacious, vividly portray the enigmatic figure known as Isa, a name that resonates with an uncanny phonetic similarity to Jesus. He is recounted as having arrived not as a conquering potentate or a shrewd merchant, but as an earnest seeker of profound spiritual truth. He attentively absorbed the profound teachings of the lamas, meticulously observed the intricate rhythms of their meditative practices, and delved deeply into the esoteric understanding of the perennial cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Yet, his sojourn was not solely for the purpose of passive assimilation. The narratives further assert that he also imparted his own profound wisdom, expounding upon the concept of a spiritual kingdom, not of this transient world, and a liberation rooted not in rigid ritualistic adherence, but in the boundless power of unconditional love. Could it be plausible that the serene and hallowed halls of Tibet's ancient monasteries once reverberated with the resonance of his distinctive voice? Is it conceivable that those geographically distant sanctuaries once hosted profound intellectual and spiritual dialogues where the parables originating from Galilee converged with the sacred sutras of the Buddha? To merely contemplate such an extraordinary convergence is to envision the spectacular confluence of two immense and powerful rivers of philosophical thought, merging harmoniously within the majestic silence of the Himalayas. The very notion of such an event appears inherently improbable, even bordering on the fantastical. Tibet, even in contemporary times, remains remarkably remote, accessible only through arduous ascents and treacherous mountain passes. Nevertheless, Ancient caravans and devout pilgrims successfully navigated these perilous journeys in antiquity. Precious commodities such as silk, wool, and turquoise traversed these passes, as did an abundance of captivating stories. If material goods could reach the distant reaches of Tibet, then why not a wandering, sagacious teacher? Certain Tibetan chronicles, irrespective of their precise historical authenticity or potential embellishment through countless oral retellings, distinctly recall a figure who courageously challenged established hierarchies and rigid rituals, consistently advocating for boundless compassion above entrenched tradition. He is remembered not as an imposing outsider dictating his will, but as a revered sage whose profound words resonated deeply with the resident monks. His teachings, centered on the principle of profound mercy, harmonized remarkably with their own deeply ingrained belief in limitless compassion. However, his unequivocal insistence on divine love as an intrinsic, essential essence unequivocally set him apart. Skeptical scholars contend that these legends are merely the eventual product of missionary influence during later centuries, representing tales reimagined through the prism of subsequent Christian contact. Yet, other observers highlight the remarkable persistence of these narratives in regions scarcely touched by the pervasive reach of Western faith. If these accounts were indeed fabrications, then why did they manifest in such geographically isolated locales, tenaciously clinging to the oral traditions of secluded monastic communities? Perhaps the underlying truth resides within the enigmatic process of transmission itself. The life and teachings of a profound teacher, once intricately woven into the rich fabric of oral storytelling, possess the remarkable capacity to journey far beyond the physical distances his feet ever traversed. Nevertheless, the uncanny parallels that emerge compel us to pose a profound question. What if the voice that once eloquently preached in Galilee did indeed rise amidst the profound quietude of the Himalayan night? What if those ancient monks, centuries before the arrival of any Christian missionaries, meticulously preserved a faint yet enduring memory of a Western sage who embarked on a spiritual quest for wisdom? The resonant echoes emanating from Tibet may never definitively yield absolute certainty. They persist as ethereal and subtle as the whispering mountain winds, carrying words that bear an uncanny resemblance to fragments of sacred scripture, yet shifting with the elusive quality of mist when one attempts to grasp them firmly. However, they serve as a powerful reminder that the profound silence of the Gospels is not, in fact, empty. Across vast mountain ranges, expansive deserts, and the immeasurable expanse of ages, this silence reverberates with whispers too persistent and compelling to be simply disregarded. Thus, as we linger amidst the high monasteries and their ancient legends, we sense the profound expansion of the inherent mystery. The enigmatic missing years stretch even further eastward, propelled by the currents of rumor, collective memory, and the strange, enduring power of narrative. Perhaps the revered sage known as Isa once sat cross-legged among the monks, his voice harmoniously mingling with their ancient chants. Or perhaps the story itself is the enduring echo, shaped not by the physical imprint of feet upon stone, but by humanity's perennial longing to bridge the teachings of its greatest spiritual luminaries. Far to the north of India, exquisitely cradled by majestic mountains and life-giving rivers, lies the enchanting valley of Kashmir. Renowned for its breathtaking natural beauty, It has historically served as a vibrant crossroads for a multitude of cultures: Hindu, Buddhist, Persian, and, in later epochs, Islamic. Yet, among its whispered traditions, there lingers another captivating tale, one that stretches the very boundaries of human imagination. This tale recounts the enduring memory of a wandering teacher, a prodigious healer whose profound presence continues to subtly permeate the spiritual fabric of the region. In its myriad villages and through its rich tapestry of oral legends, he is occasionally described as a man of foreign origin, possessing a remarkably gentle demeanor, who eloquently spoke of boundless compassion and profound forgiveness. He miraculously healed through the power of touch, generously offered sagacious guidance to the impoverished, and gathered a devoted following not through the allure of wealth or temporal power, but solely through the pervasive influence of his intrinsic kindness. His name, transmitted through fragmented accounts, was consistently said to bear a striking resemblance to Isa. Some accounts provocatively claim that he originated from the distant West, a land situated beyond Persia, largely unknown to the indigenous people of Kashmir. Could this enigmatic figure plausibly have been Jesus, traversing these verdant valleys during those 18 undocumented years of his life? Such a suggestion profoundly unsettles conventional historical narratives. Yet, the striking parallels are undeniably compelling. The teachings attributed to this mysterious healer echo themes that are remarkably familiar to us: the inherent blessedness of the humble, the sacred sanctity of peace, and the intrinsic worth of those often overlooked by society. His life spent among the poor and marginalized vividly reflects the very same profound compassion that later manifests so powerfully in the canonical Gospels. The most provocative and contentious claim emanates from a specific site in Srinagar, the capital city of Kashmir, the revered shrine known as the Roza Bal. Within its hallowed confines, a tomb is venerated by some as the final resting place of Uz Asaf, a saint remembered reverently as both a prophet and a miraculous healer. Certain traditions, though vehemently disputed by mainstream scholarship, assert with conviction that Uz Asaf was none other than Jesus himself, who journeyed to India and lived to a ripe old age. Local folklore intricately weaves him into their own rich cultural heritage, not as an alien stranger, but as a revered holy man who walked upon their sacred soil. To stand before the Roza Bal is to experience a profound sense of history, trembling with an extraordinary possibility. Could it be that the man crucified in Jerusalem did not, in fact, conclude his earthly days there, but instead embarked on an epic eastward journey to teach and to heal once more? Or could it be that the distinct stories of Isa and Uz Asaf merged over the course of many centuries, blending the separate memories of different revered sages into a single composite figure? Skeptical scholars typically dismiss these claims as mere syncretism, a cultural fusion of local indigenous traditions with subtle echoes of Christian teachings that were introduced much later. Yet, the remarkable persistence of this narrative within Kashmir, recounted long before any modern Western visitors arrived in search of lost gospels, strongly suggests a deeper and more profound mystery. Oral traditions, after all, often carry profound truths in ways that conventional historical methodologies frequently overlook. What is most truly remarkable is not the definitive certainty of these claims, but rather their extraordinary resonance and enduring power. The tantalizing possibility that Jesus once walked the verdant valleys of Kashmir profoundly stretches our collective imagination beyond the narrow confines of Judea. It compels us to envision a Messiah whose boundless compassion was not circumscribed by geographical borders, whose sacred footsteps touched lands far beyond the expansive reach of the mighty Roman Empire. Regardless of whether he physically stood beneath Kashmir's majestic cypress trees, the story tenaciously persists, shimmering with an ethereal quality, much like the breathtaking reflection of mountains upon the serene surface of Dal Lake. He is remembered as a teacher, a healer, revered not for conquest or temporal power, but for his boundless mercy. He represents a presence who seemed to belong simultaneously to everywhere and nowhere at once. Perhaps this is precisely why the valley holds this legend so tightly. For in its gentle, enduring memory of a sage from the West, Kashmir becomes an integral part of the larger, overarching mystery of the missing years. A sacred place where profound silence unexpectedly takes on tangible form, and where the subtle whispers of a hidden journey continue to gently drift through the very air. In the stark, yet hauntingly beautiful, elevated heights of Ladakh, where ancient stone monasteries cling precariously to sheer cliffs and the rarefied air imparts a taste of eternity, an extraordinary and profoundly impactful claim once reverberated throughout the Western world. It was specifically here, in the waning years of the 19th century, that the intrepid Russian adventurer Nicholas Notovich famously asserted he had discovered ancient manuscripts meticulously detailing the life of Isa, a revered prophet originating from the distant West. Notovich vividly recounted that subsequent to sustaining a broken leg during his extensive travels through the formidable Himalayas, he was graciously transported to Hemis Monastery, a profoundly remote Buddhist sanctuary nestled deeply amidst the towering mountains. As he convalesced from his injury, the resident lamas purportedly unveiled to him a priceless collection of ancient scrolls. These venerable texts, they explained, chronicled the life of a holy man who had journeyed from Judea many centuries prior, who had diligently studied their sacred scriptures, engaged in profound theological debates with their learned monks, and left behind a legacy of teachings that provoked both immense admiration and, at times, considerable resistance. The ancient manuscripts, meticulously described by Notovich, portrayed Isa as an earnest spiritual explorer who dedicated a significant portion of his life to immersion within the philosophical and religious traditions of the Hindus and Buddhists. These compelling accounts vividly depicted his profound disdain for the entrenched system of caste privilege, his boundless empathy for the marginalized and downtrodden, and his unwavering conviction that genuine spiritual purity resided not in rigid ceremonial practices, but in acts of profound mercy and compassion. The striking resemblances between this portrayal and the figure of Jesus presented in the canonical Gospels were, for many, unequivocally evident and deeply resonant. Upon Notovich's eventual return to the European continent and the subsequent publication of his astounding discovery, the global community responded with a complex admixture of intense fascination and vehement indignation. A segment of the populace lauded his findings as arguably the most monumental archaeological or theological revelation since the very Gospels themselves. Conversely, a vocal contingent unequivocally condemned him as a cunning impostor, leveling accusations of wholesale fabrication against his entire narrative. Academic scholars, with a collective skepticism, summarily dismissed the supposed scrolls as mere folklore, adamantly asserting the non-existence of any such historical records. Intriguingly, however, subsequent adventurers and scholars journeying to the remote region of Ladakh reported encountering analogous narratives recounted by the venerable monks of Hemis Monastery. This recurring phenomenon begged the profound question: if the entire account were a mere contrivance, why did these persistent echoes of the story continue to reverberate across the vast Himalayan expanse? The enigma only deepened when one considered the inherent nature of traditional Himalayan knowledge preservation, where wisdom was seldom confined to single comprehensive manuscripts, but was instead diffused across numerous monastic institutions, transmitted through generations via oral traditions, and diligently safeguarded in disparate, often fragmentary forms. It remains entirely conceivable that the fabled Hemis scrolls, assuming their historical existence, constituted nothing more than a derivative transcription of much older, now irretrievably lost, primary accounts. Alternatively, they might have represented elaborate narrative embellishments, meticulously woven from the faint, lingering recollections of itinerant travelers whose spoken words had gradually permeated the cultural fabric of Tibet many centuries prior. What persists as the most profoundly captivating aspect of this entire narrative is the remarkable specificity of the detail. The remembrance of a prophet originating from the distant land of Judea, recalled not as a conquering figure of dominance, but rather as an unassuming instructor of profound humility. The pertinent question then arises: how could such a distinctive historical personality manifest within the collective Tibetan memory unless some tangible resonance of his actual presence had genuinely traversed those ancient pathways? While judicious skeptics are entirely justified in reminding us that the rigorous discipline of history unequivocally demands verifiable evidence, the very absence of such definitive proof paradoxically creates a fertile void for contemplation and wonder. And within that expansive conceptual space, the enduring saga of the purported lost scrolls has persistently survived, carried forward through the annals of time, much like a partially heard, ethereal chant emanating from the secluded cloisters of Hemis. Regardless of the ultimate veracity concerning the physical existence of these controversial manuscripts, their potent legend undeniably beckons us to envision a Jesus who literally traversed landscapes where elusive snow leopards prowl, who engaged in profound study within ancient monasteries, where sacred mantras ascend against the biting mountain winds, and who ultimately returned to the familiar environs of Galilee, imbued with a profound wisdom not circumscribed by the geographical boundaries of a single homeland. The actual scrolls themselves may indeed be irrevocably lost to history, or perhaps they were never more than a figment of a traveler's imagination. Nevertheless, the captivating narrative of their potential existence continues to propagate outwards, creating widening ripples of speculation and contemplation. This persistent story serves as a poignant reminder that the enigmatic missing years of Jesus' life are far from an empty void. Instead, they are replete with the tantalizing possibility of clandestine journeys, of sacred utterances potentially interred within the high-altitude libraries of the formidable Himalayas, patiently awaiting intrepid seekers audacious enough to undertake the arduous climb and attentively listen for their echoes. Long preceding the widespread adoption of the term Silk Road, the ancient land of Persia inherently functioned as the monumental geopolitical and cultural conduit, connecting the disparate realms of the East and the West. Throughout its storied history, Mighty empires, including the Achaemenid, Parthian, and later the Sasanian dynasties, successively emerged and then receded upon its fertile soil, each leaving an indelible legacy of meticulously constructed roads, flourishing urban centers, and magnificent temples that collectively transformed Persia into an unparalleled intersection of diverse civilizations and intellectual currents. Should Jesus have indeed embarked upon an eastward pilgrimage, it is almost certain that his path would have intersected with this remarkable territory, where he would have inhaled an atmosphere redolent with the fragrant aroma of incense and the heady scent of profound philosophical discourse. Persia was far from an ordinary dominion. It was the ancestral cradle of Zoroastrianism, recognized as one of the most ancient known religions centered around the duality of light and sacred fire. Its revered priestly class, known as the Magi, were widely reputed to possess the extraordinary ability to interpret the celestial patterns of the stars and to discern arcane truths hidden within their luminous glow. Indeed, the very narratives of the Gospels themselves preserve the memory of these enigmatic magi who journeyed from the distant eastern lands to pay homage to an infant child in Bethlehem. This historical detail provokes a fascinating hypothetical question. Could there have been, many years subsequent to that initial encounter, a profound reversal of that original journey, with Jesus himself traveling eastward to actively seek out the very homeland from which his inaugural visitors had originally emanated? The vibrant Persian world that he might have encountered was a crucible of profound spiritual diversity. Zoroastrian fire temples cast their ethereal glow across the nocturnal landscape, their sacred flames meticulously maintained and never permitted to extinguish. Robust Jewish communities flourished within the bustling metropolis of Babylon, carrying with them the enduring spiritual and cultural legacy of their exile. Buddhist monks, traversing westward from the Indian subcontinent, established tranquil monasteries within the verdant oases scattered across Persia. Along these very same arterial caravan routes, Manichaean preachers actively disseminated their syncretic doctrines, intricately weaving together grand visions of cosmic light and pervasive darkness. Persia, therefore, was less a monolithic culture and more a magnificent mosaic of beliefs and peoples, a truly exceptional locale where an earnest seeker could encounter entire worlds contained within other worlds. Could Jesus have possibly stood among the learned descendants of the Magi, attentively listening to their ancient hymns, celebrating fire and the eternal cosmic struggle? Might he have engaged in profound conversations with Jewish mystics, still deeply engrossed in contemplating the profound mysteries of their exile, their sacred scriptures resonating with potent apocalyptic hope? Within the complex tapestry of Persian thought, the concept of duality specifically, the perpetual cosmic conflict between illuminating light and encroaching darkness, occupied a central and paramount position. How remarkably striking it is, then, that Jesus would subsequently articulate his own identity as the very light of the world, asserting that darkness fundamentally cannot overcome it. The question then arises, was this potent imagery exclusively indigenous to Judean spiritual traditions? Or did it perhaps carry the subtle yet profound resonance of ancient Persian philosophical concepts? Beyond its rich religious landscape, Persia also proffered a wealth of accumulated wisdom in the specialized fields of medicine, astronomical observation, and philosophical inquiry. The numerous caravanserais serving as essential way stations for weary merchants and their caravans, were far more than mere places of temporary repose. They functioned as dynamic crossroads of intellectual exchange and vibrant conversation, where a solitary traveler could find themselves engaged in discourse with a Persian astronomer one evening, a contemplative Buddhist monk the next, and a profound Jewish scholar on the subsequent day. If Jesus indeed traversed these ancient thoroughfares, he would inevitably have encountered a rich tapestry of interwoven ideas, all unfolding beneath the vast, unchanging desert sky. Certain esoteric traditions subtly insinuate that he absorbed this diverse wisdom, not as one who merely imitated, but rather as an individual who profoundly refined and ultimately transformed these disparate intellectual currents. Perhaps the remarkably universal tenor of his later teachings, the pervasive sense that his message inherently transcended geographical and cultural boundaries, was profoundly shaped by these formative encounters in lands where a multitude of faiths and philosophies already harmoniously mingled. Skeptical voices will, quite rightly, underscore the conspicuous silence of canonical scripture on these matters, asserting that such speculative notions are nothing more than fanciful dreams. Yet the very presence of the Magi in the Nativity narrative serves as a potent reminder that Persia already held a significant, albeit mysterious, place within the foundational story. If these wise men could undertake an arduous journey westward in diligent search of a miraculous child, then why should it be considered impossible that the grown man might have returned eastward to their ancestral homeland, diligently seeking profound wisdom amidst their sacred, perpetually burning fires? The enigmatic Persian connection thus lingers like a delicate, faintly discernible thread woven into the intricate tapestry of Jesus's unrecorded years. It does not furnish irrefutable proof, but it powerfully suggests. It compellingly invites us to envision a Jesus not hermetically confined to the small village of Nazareth, but rather one actively journeying through expansive lands where erudite star readers and venerable sages engaged in profound nocturnal debates. Perhaps his scriptural silence was not an indication of quiescent stillness, but rather the hushed echo of his purposeful footsteps carried eastward towards the mesmerizing, sacred flames of ancient Persia. When one meticulously juxtaposes the profound teachings attributed to Jesus with the equally profound doctrines expounded by the Buddha, the resultant echoes can prove remarkably startling and resonant. Despite being separated by vast spans of centuries and immense geographical distances, their articulated words frequently appear to convey the identical language of boundless compassion, profound humility, and spiritual liberation. While a segment of scholars readily dismisses these striking resemblances as mere historical coincidence, a more audacious contingent proposes a direct intellectual influence, positing that during his enigmatic missing years, Jesus might have directly encountered Buddhist philosophy, subsequently integrating its wisdom into his spiritual framework and carrying it back to Galilee in ways that fundamentally reshaped the core tenets of his message. Consider, for instance, the sublime Beatitudes delivered from a verdant hillside overlooking the tranquil Sea of Galilee. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. Now place these profound pronouncements alongside verses drawn from the ancient Buddhist scripture, the Dhammapada, where the Buddha sagely declares, "Hatred is never appeased by hatred. Hatred is appeased by love. Conquer anger with love, evil with good. the greedy with generosity, the liar with truth. In both venerable traditions, there is a clear exaltation of the humble and the unpretentious. Both traditions consistently uplift the suffering and the downtrodden, and crucially, both passionately advocate for the radical transformation of violence into acts of profound compassion and understanding. How profoundly curious, then, is the very existence of these compelling parallels across such formidable distances and temporal divides. Could it be that they reveal an inherent universal truth, independently discerned and articulated in vastly different cultural and geographical landscapes? Or might they, perhaps, point towards something more direct, a tangible exchange, a transmission of ideas carried along the ancient, bustling trade routes that historically linked the Mediterranean world to the vibrant heart of India? By the dawn of the 1st century CE, the philosophical and spiritual tenets of Buddhism had already propagated far beyond its historical birthplace in ancient India. Monasteries dedicated to Buddhist practice stood prominently in Bactria, strategically situated along the western fringes of Persia. Buddhist merchants actively traversed the legendary Silk Road, meticulously transporting not only exotic goods, but also sacred statues, philosophical scrolls, and captivating stories. Their profound ideas disseminated not merely eastward towards the distant reaches of China, but also significantly westward, gradually reaching the peripheries of the formidable Roman world. In this context, it is not at all arduous to envision an earnest spiritual seeker encountering these transformative teachings within the bustling caravanserais, those vital communal hubs where weary merchants found respite and erudite sages engaged in deep philosophical discourse. Even in the realm of evocative imagery, the parallels shimmer with striking resonance. Jesus eloquently spoke of the humble lilies in the field, asserting that they were clothed more richly than Solomon in all his glory. The Buddha, in turn, spoke of the pristine lotus flower, which, despite emerging from muddy water, rises pure and unstained. Both revered figures perceived in the ephemeral beauty of flowers not merely aesthetic delight, but profound lessons concerning impermanence, the transient nature of existence, and a ubiquitous divine or cosmic care. Crucially, both spiritual leaders exhorted their respective followers to consciously detach themselves from the allure of material wealth and to assiduously seek out the invaluable treasures of the spirit. Of course, it is imperative to acknowledge that profound theological and philosophical differences undeniably persist between these two great traditions. Jesus articulated a vision of a benevolent Father in heaven, a personal God of boundless love and mercy, whereas the Buddha directed his followers towards an awakening that transcended the realm of gods, a liberation from the cyclical suffering of rebirth. Yet even within these distinctions, the underlying spiritual tones occasionally overlap with remarkable clarity. When Jesus urged his disciples to deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow him, do we not perceive a subtle yet discernible echo of the Buddhist imperative to renounce worldly attachment and diligently walk the noble eightfold path towards enlightenment? Skeptics, employing a rigorous analytical framework, contend that these observed similarities are merely the natural outcome of convergent thought. The notion that human beings, when confronted with the universal realities of suffering and existence, will frequently arrive at analogous philosophical and ethical conclusions independently. However, for those captivated by the profound enigma of Jesus' unrecorded years, The tantalizing possibility of direct influence proves almost irresistible. If Jesus did indeed journey eastward, if he metaphorically or literally sat among contemplative monks in the ancient lands of India or Tibet, then these striking parallels may transcend mere coincidence. They may, in fact, represent discernible traces of profound teachings absorbed, meticulously transformed, and ultimately carried back to his homeland. And yet, even if the historical Jesus never physically departed the confines of Judea, the persistent existence of these parallels serves as a powerful reminder that wisdom traditions across the globe frequently engage in a mysterious and unspoken dialogue with one another. They eloquently demonstrate that fundamental virtues such as compassion, humility, and mercy are not exclusively confined to the doctrines of a single faith tradition, but rather emerge organically wherever the human heart ardently longs for spiritual liberation and profound understanding. Consequently, as we meticulously trace these faint yet compelling conceptual lines connecting the familiar landscapes of Galilee with the distant mystical lands of the Buddha, we are ultimately left not with definitive certainty, but with an abiding sense of profound wonder and contemplation. Perhaps those enigmatic missing years were indeed periods of diligent listening, of earnest learning from distant, profound teachers, or perhaps, more simply, they are compelling proof that fundamental truth, much like a vital river, spontaneously springs forth in numerous places, simultaneously across the vast human landscape. Regardless of the interpretation, the parallels undeniably remain, shimmering like ethereal reflections across tranquil waters, serving as a poignant reminder that the profound mystery encompassing the historical and spiritual figure of Jesus may be considerably vaster and more intricate than we have ever previously dared to imagine. Within the venerable Buddhist philosophical framework, an esteemed spiritual archetype known as the Bodhisattva embodies a profound commitment. This enlightened entity actively pursues spiritual awakening, not for the solitary attainment of individual freedom from worldly cycles, but rather for the profound and universal emancipation of every sentient being. Diverging significantly from those who might quietly transcend into the serene state of nirvana for their own personal tranquility, the Bodhisattva consciously chooses to remain present within the temporal realm, prioritizing boundless empathy above individual spiritual release. This compassionate being dedicates their continued presence amidst the sorrows and tribulations of existence until every single individual has ultimately discovered their own path to freedom and cessation of suffering. When one juxtaposes this noble spiritual archetype with the historical and theological persona of Jesus of Nazareth, the points of convergence become strikingly evident and profoundly illuminating. Here emerges a revered spiritual instructor whose earthly ministry was characterized by extraordinary acts. He restored health to the ailing, provided solace to the economically disadvantaged, and ultimately offered his very existence, not as a self-serving act, but as a redemptive sacrifice for the entire human race. This was a figure who possessed the inherent capacity to assert worldly dominion and command authority, yet deliberately chose a path of profound self-abnegation and ultimate immolation. His boundless empathy, an intrinsic facet of his character, even embraced those who orchestrated his demise, as he uttered words of absolution and pardon with his final, fading utterances. From the perspective of certain theological and philosophical interpreters, Jesus himself manifests as an embodiment of the bodhisattva principle, perhaps even a bodhisattva veiled by a different cultural and religious guise. One is compelled to ponder whether such a profound and resonant similarity between these two iconic figures is merely an arbitrary happenstance of historical development. Alternatively, could it signify a more profound, interwoven tapestry of spiritual evolution, potentially stemming from undocumented periods of Jesus' life, often referred to as his missing years, during which he might have engaged with esteemed Buddhist masters? These teachers, it is hypothesized, could have initially imbued him with the profound spiritual paradigm of altruistic and unconditional compassion, a cornerstone of his later teachings. To entertain the notion of Jesus assimilating the profound bodhisattva ideal during extensive travels through ancient India or the remote regions of Tibet is to envision his eventual return to his native Galilee imbued with a transformative concept of spiritual redemption. This vision, in stark contrast to prevailing religious doctrines of his time, would not have been confined by stringent ceremonial edicts or exclusionary ritualistic statutes, but rather presented as a universally accessible offering, extended unconditionally to all humanity. Indeed, the bodhisattva, as a spiritual archetype, was far from an obscure concept. It was a figure whose essence had permeated various cultures. In the centuries preceding Jesus' birth, significant Buddhist scriptures and philosophical treatises had already journeyed westward, carried along ancient trade routes. Traveling merchants and intrepid explorers often recounted captivating narratives of Avalokiteshvara, revered as the embodiment of boundless compassion and a benevolent savior, and of Maitreya, the prophesied future Buddha, destined to usher in a new era of spiritual renewal and global harmony. These narratives undoubtedly enriched the spiritual landscape of the ancient world. One might reasonably inquire whether the resonating narratives and spiritual tenets of these Eastern luminaries could have, by some means, reached the receptive ears of a young, spiritually inquisitive Jesus, thereby subtly molding the trajectory and ultimate purpose of his life's mission. However, an alternative, equally compelling hypothesis merits consideration. It posits that the striking resemblance between these two profound figures does not necessarily originate from direct historical influence or cultural transmission, but rather from a phenomenon of independent spiritual convergence. This perspective suggests that when humankind, across diverse civilizations and epochs, confronts the profound and pervasive reality of suffering with deep introspection, it instinctively conceives of a remarkably similar archetypal solution, a benevolent figure who steadfastly refuses to avert their gaze from pain, who willingly shoulders the tribulations of their fellow beings, and who, through their unwavering presence, effectively constructs a vital conduit between profound despondency and enduring optimism. If this proposition holds true, then the remarkable affinity between Jesus and the Bodhisattva might illuminate a reality far more profound than mere historical accident or cultural exchange. It could, in essence, unveil a fundamental, universal truth that transcends geographical boundaries, cultural distinctions, and the specific dogmas of organized religions. Nevertheless, the enigmatic nature of this spiritual congruence continues to intrigue and invite further contemplation. Intriguingly, certain apocryphal scriptures, texts excluded from the canonical Christian Bible, depict Jesus in a lexicon and conceptual framework that bears an astonishing proximity to ancient Eastern philosophical traditions. For instance, the Acts of Thomas, a notable early Christian work, presents a narrative wherein Jesus' supposed twin, Didymus Judas Thomas, embarks on extensive travels as a dedicated missionary, venturing eastward and disseminating a version of the gospel that is deeply imbued with rich Indian cultural and spiritual motifs. Such documents, despite their eventual repudiation and exclusion by the nascent Christian ecclesiastical authorities, nonetheless intimate the existence of a broader, more inclusive intellectual and spiritual milieu than the circumscribed boundaries of established religious orthodoxy might otherwise suggest. They offer glimpses into alternative early Christian understandings. This persistent inquiry leads us back to the profound question of whether the undocumented periods of Jesus' life, often termed the missing years, might indeed contain the pivotal answers to these spiritual quandaries. Could these unrecorded intervals represent the crucial crucible where a humble Galilean spiritual instructor encountered and deeply engaged with the Bodhisattva ideal, subsequently integrating and profoundly transforming its core tenets into the very fabric and expression of his own public ministry? Regrettably, definitive knowledge eludes us. The historical void surrounding these years steadfastly resists any conclusive certainty. Yet despite this prevailing silence, the luminous image of Jesus as a profoundly compassionate Savior shines with an ever-increasing brilliance. A figure whose overarching mission was fundamentally characterized not by a desire for personal transcendence or escape from worldly engagement, but rather by an all-encompassing embrace of humanity in its entirety. To perceive Jesus through this particular interpretive lens is to apprehend him afresh, not merely as an isolated historical personality confined to a singular geographical or cultural context, but rather as an integral component within a vast, interconnected tapestry of universal spiritual insight. His earthly existence, whether shaped by direct external influence or by an independent spiritual convergence, profoundly reflected and embodied the deepest, most inherent currents of humanity's yearning for divine clemency and compassionate intervention. Perhaps this profound resonance is precisely why his narrative has persisted with such unwavering power throughout millennia. For much like the revered Bodhisattva, he is immortalized in collective memory not for any personal pursuit of earthly acclaim or spiritual exaltation, but rather for his ultimate act of selfless surrender and unconditional dedication to others. In the subtle nuances of his profound narrative teachings, articulated through evocative parables, and in every tangible demonstration of his miraculous healing prowess, the potent spiritual resonance of boundless compassion unequivocally persists. This enduring spiritual echo serves as an invisible yet profound tether, intrinsically linking the ancient landscapes of Galilee to the majestic peaks of the Himalayas, connecting the sacred narratives of the Christian gospel to the revered wisdom found within Buddhist sutras, and ultimately forging an unbreakable spiritual bond between the distinct cultural spheres of the Occidental and Oriental worlds. Centuries prior to the architectural emergence of Europe's austere monastic complexes, constructed from enduring stone and steeped in profound quietude, the expansive, arid landscapes of the Middle East were already home to vibrant, albeit secluded, communities of spiritual seekers and mystics. These devout individuals, both men and women, deliberately disengaged themselves from the bustling clamor of urban centers, choosing instead to pursue an intimate communion with the divine, endeavoring to discern the subtle voice of God amidst the whispering winds and shifting sands of the wilderness. Their spiritual regimen was rigorous. They engaged in prolonged periods of fasting, dedicated themselves to fervent prayer, meticulously observed the celestial tapestry of the night sky, and through their hypnotic, rhythmic chants, appeared to channel and reverberate the very pulsations of an eternal, timeless cosmic order. Prominent among these ascetic groups were the Essenes, a distinct Jewish religious brotherhood whose profound theological treatises, famously unearthed within the ancient caves of Qumran, strategically located near the shores of the Dead Sea, articulate a spiritual philosophy deeply concerned with ritual purity, messianic prophecy, and an ardent expectation of an imminent apocalyptic transformation. Their communal lifestyle was characterized by rigorous self-discipline. They habitually donned unadorned, simple attire, sustained themselves on a diet of basic, unembellished provisions, and earnestly anticipated the advent of a divinely appointed teacher of righteousness. A charismatic spiritual leader prophesied to guide their community into a forthcoming epoch of profound enlightenment and spiritual illumination. This leads to a compelling speculative inquiry. Is it plausible that Jesus, during his unrecorded formative years, might have sojourned amongst these devout Essene communities, absorbing their spiritual discipline and intellectual fervor? Could the profound, contemplative silence of their desert existence have profoundly influenced and sculpted his nascent understanding and visionary conception of the impending kingdom to come? However, the spiritual landscape of the desert extended far beyond the confines of the Essene settlements. In the ancient lands of Egypt, numerous ascetic practitioners congregated along the verdant banks of the Nile, diligently cultivating spiritual disciplines that would, in later centuries, serve as a foundational inspiration for the emergence of Christian monastic traditions. Further eastward, across the vast expanses of Persia and Arabia, itinerant wise men and spiritual masters articulated profound mystical visions and intoned sacred hymns that fervently celebrated the ultimate spiritual unity with the divine essence. Throughout these sprawling desert territories, a constant flow of merchants, lyrical poets, and profound mystics traversed the ancient routes, their diverse spiritual songs and narratives coalescing into a harmonious, almost ethereal chorus of otherworldly wisdom. Should Jesus have indeed embarked upon extensive eastward travels, his journey would undoubtedly have exposed him not only to the vibrant cacophony of bustling marketplaces and the opulent grandeur of imperial courts, but also, crucially, to the profound quietude and spiritual intensity of these solitary desert ascetics. One might vividly imagine him pausing, for instance, within the austere confines of a remote desert monastery, intently absorbing the fervent prayers softly murmured, almost whispered, against the relentless, mournful howl of the desert wind. It is entirely conceivable that during such encounters, he might have heard sacred verses and spiritual incantations that resonated deeply within his own burgeoning spiritual consciousness. Timeless hymns celebrating the triumphant victory of luminous spiritual illumination over encroaching existential obscurity, and poignant odes extolling the ultimate supremacy of boundless divine mercy over the strictures of punitive judgment. Subsequent centuries witnessed the emergence of the revered Sufi poets within the burgeoning Islamic civilization, whose lyrical expressions and spiritual verses resonate with an uncanny, almost haunting familiarity. As the celebrated Persian poet Rumi eloquently penned, "Wherever you turn, there is the face of God," encapsulating a profound sense of immanent divinity. This compels us to ponder, is it conceivable that such profound mystical rhythms and philosophical strains originated from the very same primal spiritual source that Jesus himself might have tapped into during his hypothetical sojourns in the ancient deserts of the East? Or, alternatively, does this striking congruence suggest a more universal truth, that all genuine mystics, irrespective of their cultural or religious origins, when they gaze with profound introspection into the same fundamental spiritual silence, inevitably perceive and articulate the identical divine presence, albeit through the diverse linguistic and conceptual frameworks unique to their respective traditions? The canonical Gospels recount that prior to the commencement of his public ministry, Jesus undertook a significant spiritual retreat, withdrawing into the desolate wilderness for a period of 40 days. This pivotal event prompts a crucial interpretive question. Was this prolonged period merely an austere test of personal fortitude and contemplative isolation? Or, conversely, could it represent the culminating efflorescence of spiritual insights and profound understandings that had been assiduously cultivated and deeply embedded within his consciousness long beforehand? Perhaps it was the blossoming of seeds of ancient desert wisdom, the fruition of profound mystical encounters, and the echoing resonance of sacred chants whose timeless cadences continue to subtly permeate the fabric of existence, drifting through the annals of history, much like grains of sand carried by the desert winds. The vast, indifferent expanse of the desert, by its very nature, maintains no permanent chronicle of those who traverse its formidable terrain. Its relentless winds, with swift efficiency, obliterate any transient footprints as rapidly as they are impressed upon the shifting sands. Yet, a profound and enduring spiritual memory undeniably persists within the transformative teachings that emanate from the lives of those who have journeyed and wandered through its sacred solitude. It is therefore conceivable that Jesus' profound empathy, his unwavering advocacy for the marginalized and economically deprived, and his insistent exhortation to embrace a life of unpretentious simplicity, all bear discernible imprints of the desert mysticism he might have absorbed and internalized during those crucial, formative years that the canonical Gospels conspicuously omit from their historical narratives. To conceptualize Jesus' spiritual development in this broader context is not, in any manner, to diminish or efface his singular and unparalleled spiritual distinctiveness. On the contrary, it serves to profoundly expand and deepen our understanding of it, enabling us to perceive him as an integral and pivotal figure within an immense and ancient lineage of spiritual aspirants, individuals who, throughout history, have deliberately sought the profound solitude and enveloping silence of the desert sands, and in that sacred stillness, discovered a resonant spiritual voice that transcended their individual human capacities. Consequently, the vast, evocative desert endures as an intrinsic and inseparable element within the overarching enigma of Jesus' unrecorded years. It is to be understood not as a desolate, empty expanse, but rather as a majestic, natural cathedral of profound silence, a sacred space where ancient mystics once intoned their spiritual harmonies, and where, perchance, Jesus himself, in his quest for divine wisdom, also lent his discerning ear, absorbing the profound spiritual cadences of the wilderness. Among the most singularly compelling and profoundly impactful aspects distinguishing Jesus' public ministry were his remarkable and numerous acts of miraculous healing. With a mere compassionate touch, he restored full visual acuity to those afflicted by blindness. Through the potent utterance of a simple word, he purified and restored individuals suffering from the debilitating disease of leprosy. And with a gentle, authoritative gesture, he brought profound solace and tranquility to minds tormented by spiritual or psychological distress. These extraordinary occurrences are consistently chronicled within the canonical Gospels as unequivocal divine wonders, serving as powerful attestations and undeniable emblems of his inherent, transcendent authority. Nevertheless, certain inquisitive minds have pondered a fascinating possibility. Could Jesus' extraordinary aptitude for healing also represent a profound reservoir of specialized knowledge acquired during his undocumented formative years? In the ancient subcontinent of India, the intricate medical system of Ayurveda, a holistic science emphasizing natural health, had already been meticulously refined and widely practiced for numerous centuries. Its adherents fundamentally believed that the human physique maintained a delicate equilibrium through vital energies, and that therapeutic restoration could be achieved through a multifaceted approach encompassing herbal remedies, specific dietary regimens, therapeutic massage, and the potent practice of the laying on of hands. Concurrently, in the secluded mountainous regions of Tibet, indigenous healers performed elaborate rituals involving tactile contact and fervent prayer, seamlessly integrating spiritual entreaties with meticulous physical care. Along the extensive network of trade routes known as the Silk Road, the rational principles of Greek medicine intermingled with the nuanced methodologies of various Eastern healing traditions, culminating in a rich synthesis of diverse practices, both profoundly practical and deeply mystical in their application. If indeed Jesus undertook journeys to the East, a compelling question arises. Is it conceivable that he meticulously studied and mastered some of these ancient healing disciplines? One might vividly picture him engaged in profound discourse with an esteemed Ayurvedic physician, diligently assimilating knowledge regarding the subtle rhythms of the human pulse, the precise application of therapeutic pressure points on the hand, and the efficacious techniques for alleviating suffering through strategic tactile engagement. Alternatively, he might have quietly observed Tibetan spiritual healers, witnessing their profound invocations of boundless compassion as they ministered to the ailing, seamlessly intertwining their medical interventions with heartfelt spiritual supplications. Such potential encounters might have profoundly instilled within him the holistic understanding that the corporeal form and the spiritual essence are not discrete, independent entities, but rather intrinsically interwoven, much like the inseparable threads comprising a single, coherent tapestry. The canonical Gospels, notably, underscore the public nature of his miraculous healings. These acts were never executed in clandestine fashion, but consistently performed openly, often amidst surging throngs of onlookers. Eager multitudes pressed in close proximity, as he gently yet powerfully laid his hands upon those afflicted by various ailments. His healing touch was never characterized by detachment or reservation. It was invariably direct, empathetic, and unreservedly offered. Certain critical observers might reasonably contend that such apparent commonalities in healing methodologies definitively prove nothing, asserting that the act of therapeutic touch is, in fact, a widespread and culturally ubiquitous practice across numerous human societies, and in this assertion, their logic holds merit. Nevertheless, a profound spiritual resonance undeniably persists. This leads to a persistent, intriguing inquiry. What accounts for the perception that Jesus' healing acts appeared so inherently intuitive, so deeply ingrained, and so utterly indispensable to the very core of his spiritual teachings? Could it be that during those enigmatic, undocumented years, he had not only observed, but perhaps even actively participated in analogous healing traditions, cultivated in lands far removed from the familiar environs of Galilee? Irrespective of whether his remarkable healing capabilities were acquired through diligent study and practice, or were divinely bestowed as a revelation, the benevolent hands of Jesus unmistakably possessed an inherent potency that profoundly astonished and deeply impressed his devoted adherents. Yet, the most enigmatic aspect of his healing ministry lies not primarily in the overt physical act itself, but rather in the boundless, animating compassion that profoundly imbued and empowered every single therapeutic encounter. In this profound emphasis on empathetic connection, his ministry once again exhibits striking similarities to various Eastern spiritual traditions, where the process of healing was never conceived as merely a physiological intervention for the corporeal form, but rather as a holistic endeavor aimed at re-establishing fundamental equilibrium, providing profound emotional and spiritual solace, and ultimately elevating the human spirit towards a state of profound inner tranquility. Perhaps then, the ultimate profound secret underpinning all genuine healing resides in the transformative moment when unconditional love itself is rendered palpable and overtly manifest. It suggests that the ancient practice of the laying on of hands, rather than being primarily a sophisticated technical skill or ritualistic gesture, is fundamentally about the quality of one's spiritual presence. This is a presence characterized by an unwavering capacity to truly perceive and acknowledge suffering, an unyielding refusal to avert one's gaze from affliction, and a profound ability to channel pure, unadulterated compassion directly into physical contact, thereby conveying solace and spiritual restoration. The healing ministrations performed by Jesus, whether influenced by the intricate principles of Ayurveda, the profound philosophies of Tibetan medicine, or the esoteric knowledge inherent in the desert's own spiritual traditions, undeniably conveyed a universal verity. While the unrecorded periods of his life might obscure the precise origins of his tutelage, the canonical Gospels, nonetheless, illuminate the manner of his practice, with absolute transparency, boundless generosity, without expectation of recompense, and entirely without prerequisite. In this profound magnanimity, one discerns the resonant reverberations of a wisdom whose genesis may span numerous geographical regions, yet ultimately blossoms in a singular, ubiquitous medium, the fertile ground of empathy and compassion. When Jesus addressed the multitudes, he frequently employed parables, simple narratives expertly woven from the fabric of agrarian life, the bounty of vineyards, and the everyday occurrences of village existence. Yet, beneath their unassuming facade, reposed profound and enigmatic mysteries. The celestial kingdom, he posited, bears a striking resemblance to a tiny mustard seed, initially diminutive, almost imperceptible to the eye, yet inherently destined to burgeon into a substantial arboreal sanctuary, offering refuge and shelter to the winged creatures of the sky. For his immediate audience inhabiting Galilee, the imagery of the mustard seed was undeniably familiar and relatable. However, for those immersed in the study of Eastern spiritual traditions, this particular metaphor evokes a distinct and deeper resonance. Within the venerable teachings of Buddhism and Hinduism, seeds frequently serve as potent symbols representing the latent, intrinsic potential residing within all sentient beings. The inherent capacity for spiritual enlightenment, interred much like a nascent spark within the innermost chambers of the human heart. In the revered Lotus Sutra, an exceptionally exalted Buddhist scripture, the lotus flower emerges from the murky depths of mud to unfurl its petals in pure and radiant splendor, thus mirroring the concealed spiritual blossoming of the soul. Could it be plausibly suggested that the parables articulated by Jesus carried subtle echoes of such profound imagery, potentially absorbed and internalized during his undocumented formative years? Perhaps the humble mustard seed constituted far more than a mere localized detail within his narratives. It may have functioned as a sophisticated symbolic conduit, establishing a profound connection between the rich tapestry of Eastern metaphors and the familiar soil of Galilee, serving as a mnemonic trace of profound teachings encountered along distant and arduous journeys. If this hypothesis holds true, then his narratives transcended their apparent function as straightforward lessons intended for agricultural laborers and marine harvesters, transforming instead into potent vessels transporting profound wisdom from far-flung civilizations. Indeed, the very essence of the parables themselves appears to possess an intrinsically universal character. One might reflect upon the poignant narrative of the prodigal son, welcomed back into the familial embrace with boundless compassion. This tale strikingly aligns with Buddhist accounts of errant disciples who ultimately retrace their steps to embrace the righteous path of Dharma. Similarly, consider the parable of the pearl of great price, wherein an individual relinquishes all worldly possessions to acquire that which holds ultimate significance. This narrative mirrors ancient Hindu sagas of renunciants who deliberately forsake material wealth in their spiritual quest to unearth the invaluable treasure of the spirit. Even the pedagogical methodology employed by Jesus resonates with a sense of familiarity. The Buddha, too, frequently instructed through the medium of parables, presenting narratives that skillfully veiled profound truths within their inherent simplicity. Both venerable teachers often communicated through enigmatic expressions, thereby inviting the listener to engage in deep contemplation, to cultivate insight not solely through direct instruction, but crucially through introspective reflection. Could such a profound congruence in teaching styles be attributed merely to fortuitous coincidence? Or might it subtly intimate the existence of shared traditions, perhaps encountered within the silent, unrecorded expanse of the missing years? Naturally, no ancient scroll explicitly states that Jesus undertook studies in India or Tibet. No canonical gospel documents the direct appropriation of Eastern parables. Nevertheless, the recurring imagery of seeds, of invaluable treasures, and of concealed spiritual growth evokes a sense of belonging not exclusively to the Galilean landscape, but rather to the expansive, interconnected family of global wisdom traditions. Perhaps this profound universality explains why his utterances feel eternally pertinent, possessing an innate capacity to traverse diverse cultures and span countless centuries, striking resonant chords in hearts far removed from their original historical context. The latent seeds embedded within his parables may therefore serve as a powerful metaphor, not merely for the enigmatic kingdom of heaven, but for the intricate unfolding of history itself. Within the profound quietude of those undocumented years, unseen seeds might have been meticulously sown, seeds embodying compassion, cultivating humility, and nurturing universal wisdom. When the opportune moment arrived, these seeds blossomed magnificently into narratives so elegantly simple that even a child could readily comprehend their surface meaning, yet simultaneously so profoundly intricate that accomplished scholars continue to grapple with their multifaceted interpretations to this very day. Perhaps this constitutes the most profound enigma of all. The truth, much like a seed, does not unveil its complete essence instantaneously. Instead, it patiently awaits, interred in profound silence, until the precise moment is ripe for its destined emergence and growth. Among the venerable ancient manuscripts that were ultimately excluded from the biblical canon rests a particularly intriguing document, the Gospel of Thomas. Unearthed from the arid sands of Egypt in the mid-20th century. This text presents not the familiar narratives of miraculous deeds and the crucifixion, but rather a compelling compendium of sayings, succinct, often enigmatic, and frequently imbued with a deeply mystical essence. Its very inaugural pronouncements beckon the reader into a sphere of profound esotericism. Whoever discovers the interpretation of these sayings will not taste death. Thomas, famously referred to as the twin of Jesus, is depicted in subsequent traditions as a zealous missionary who journeyed eastward. Certain legends situate him specifically in India, where he reportedly preached the gospel, performed healing acts, and established enduring Christian communities that persevered for centuries. His gospel, notably devoid of a continuous narrative structure, appears to align more closely with the genre of Eastern wisdom literature than with the meticulously structured accounts found in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It reads more akin to a series of enigmatic dialogues, each demanding profound and sustained contemplation from the reader. Consider, for instance, one of its compelling assertions: "The kingdom of God is inside you, and it is outside you." These words resonate powerfully, much like a Buddhist koan, effectively collapsing the conventional demarcation between the internal and the external, between the individual self and the encompassing world. Another saying unequivocally declares, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you." This profound statement mirrors fundamental Hindu and Buddhist tenets concerning the awakening of the divine spark that lies concealed within every being. Shukran. The overarching emphasis is not placed upon adherence to external laws or ordinances, but rather upon an inward journey of self-discovery, a pervasive theme that permeates Eastern philosophy just as profoundly as it flows through this long-forgotten gospel. Could it be conceivable that the Gospel of Thomas preserves fragmented echoes of teachings that were shaped and refined during the unrecorded periods of Jesus' life? If Jesus did indeed embark upon journeys eastward, if his words were imbued with the nuanced hues of Eastern philosophical thought, then perhaps such resonant echoes persisted within this text, carefully transmitted by disciples who retained a vivid memory of a more mystical and esoteric dimension of his overarching message. The burgeoning mainstream church, however, found the tenets of Thomas deeply disquieting. In stark contrast to the canonical Gospels, it offered no elaborate narrative of resurrection, no detailed accounts of miraculous interventions, and no clearly delineated structure of ecclesiastical authority. Instead, It persistently urged spiritual seekers to direct their gaze inward, to discover the inherent divine light already present within themselves. Such an emphatic focus posed a significant threat to the burgeoning institutional framework of the Church, which was striving to firmly anchor its authority in the roles of bishops, the articulation of creeds, and the observance of established rituals, to convey to the populace that the divine kingdom resided intrinsically within them was, in essence, to render the burgeoning ecclesiastical hierarchy largely superfluous. Consequently, the Gospel of Thomas was deliberately concealed, interred within the sands of Nag Hammadi for centuries, until its remarkable rediscovery. Yet, its very survival feels akin to a faint whisper emanating from the profound silence of history. It serves as a potent reminder that the multifaceted narrative of Jesus was far more diverse and expansive than the selectively curated canonical texts permit. The compelling image of Thomas undertaking a journey to India is particularly provocative. If this account holds historical veracity, he would have carried with him not only the precious memory of Jesus, but potentially also the profound influence of ideas that Jesus himself had absorbed during his own alleged journeys eastward. Could it be that the communities known as the Thomas Christians of India, those ancient lineages of believers, preserve a subtle reflection of this profound cross-cultural exchange, a living, tangible trace of those hidden, undocumented years? We are unable to ascertain this with absolute certainty. The gospel attributed to the twin remains an enduring enigma, a collection of sayings that, rather than providing definitive answers, tends to open more doors of inquiry than it closes. Yet, perhaps that very characteristic is its intrinsic purpose. Much like a profound parable or an enigmatic koan, its inherent value resides not in the provision of definitive answers, but rather in the profound questions it provokes. It beckons us to ponder what might lie concealed behind the historical silence, to envision a Jesus whose profound utterances could find a welcoming resonance as readily within the hallowed confines of an Egyptian monastery as within the sacred precincts of an Indian temple. Perhaps ultimately, the twin alluded to in this gospel is not merely the Apostle Thomas, but rather the resonant echo of an entirely distinct tradition, an Eastern counterpart to the Western faith, born in profound silence, carried across forgotten ancient routes, patiently awaiting rediscovery by those possessing the courage and discernment to truly listen. There exists a palpable sense of apprehension and risk in advancing the notion that Jesus ventured beyond the geographical confines of Judea. Such an idea profoundly unsettles the foundational pillars of traditional theology, because it constructs a portrayal of the Messiah not as an isolated singular miracle, but rather as a profound seeker whose spiritual journey was intimately shaped by extensive travels into diverse foreign lands. For some adherents, such an expansive vision is profoundly liberating and inspiring. For others, however, it is perceived as deeply destabilizing and threatening. So profoundly threatening, in fact, that any accounts of these alleged travels may have been systematically silenced, rigorously suppressed, or summarily branded as dangerous heresy. In the nascent centuries of the Christian Church, its unity remained precariously fragile. Numerous competing gospels circulated widely, each presenting its own distinct and often conflicting vision of Jesus. Some of these texts spoke of esoteric hidden sayings, others delved into profound cosmic mysteries, and still others recounted journeys that were never mentioned within the eventually canonized texts. To safeguard against the insidious threat of theological fragmentation, influential bishops and ecclesiastical councils meticulously selected which texts would be preserved and which would be summarily discarded. Accounts depicting Jesus in India or Tibet, had they been prevalent, would have fundamentally undermined the foundational claim that divine revelation was a singular, exclusive gift, firmly rooted in the specific geographical and historical contexts of Galilee and Jerusalem. It is undeniably easier, after all, to construct and maintain institutional authority upon a religious figure whose narrative is neatly confined within established geographical and theological boundaries. A Christ figure exclusively belonging to Judea, whose teachings solely operate within the predetermined framework of ancient prophecy and its fulfillment, seamlessly integrates into a meticulously constructed theological system. However, a Christ who metaphorically walks among Brahmins, Buddhists, and Zoroastrians, that particular Christ suggests a profoundly universal figure, one who transcends any singular claim of ownership, one whose expansive message cannot possibly be monopolized by any single institution or tradition. For ecclesiastical institutions that actively sought to exert and maintain rigid control, such an expansive vision was inherently perilous. Consequently, these forbidden journeys gradually receded into mere whispers of legend. Tales of Isa in the remote region of Ladakh, of Yusuf in the verdant valleys of Kashmir, and of his teachings disseminated throughout ancient Persia. These narratives were relegated to the margins, either explicitly dismissed as apocryphal or even deliberately obscured from wider knowledge. To acknowledge their veracity would have necessitated the profound admission that Christianity was not a closed, exclusive revelation, but rather an integral component of a vast, interconnected river of wisdom flowing expansively across the entire globe. The systematic suppression of alternative historical narratives and spiritual accounts is by no means an anomaly unique to Christianity. Throughout the annals of human history, countless rulers and religious leaders have meticulously drawn restrictive boundaries around what constitutes truth, unilaterally declaring one particular version as sacred and divinely sanctioned, while simultaneously condemning all others as dangerous and heretical. Yet despite such concerted efforts, these imposed boundaries possess no inherent power to extinguish the enduring flame of human imagination. Across the intervening centuries, intrepid seekers have consistently returned to the profound silence of those missing years, intuitively sensing that what was deliberately forbidden might, in fact, hold the most profound and illuminating revelations. What if the discernible absence in the scriptural record is not merely a consequence of historical ignorance, but rather a calculated and deliberate intention? What if those blank, unrecorded years were intentionally left vacant so that the overarching narrative could be meticulously shaped into something inherently tidy, easily controllable, and exclusively owned? Should this be the case, then the subtle murmurs concerning Jesus' peregrinations towards the Orient may represent mere shards of an overarching, more comprehensive verity, one perceived as excessively vast and thus perilous to established doctrines. Expeditions prescribed by authority frequently persist most robustly within oral traditions and mythologies. Their longevity stems not from empirical validation, but from their resonance with a profound, innate human perception that sagacity is not geographically constrained, that ultimate reality transcends national demarcations, and that the earthly existence of Jesus may have encompassed a far greater scope than ecclesiastical institutions permitted or acknowledged. And so, when one encounters the narratives of Isa in the elevated plateaus of Tibet, or of Yusuf in the verdant valleys of Kashmir, or indeed the cryptic allusions to concealed manuscripts within the remote reaches of Ladakh, one perceives not merely anecdotal accounts, but rather the reverberations of deliberate historical concealment and authoritative stifling. The very fact that such tales were repudiated with such vehemence and dogmatic fervor implies their inherent capacity to destabilize prevailing dogmas and challenge entrenched power structures. For could any concept prove more subversive or perilous to institutional control than that of a messianic figure whose spiritual dominion extended beyond a singular geographical territory, embracing instead the entirety of global humanity? A lacuna within historical accounts seldom signifies a benign omission. Indeed, the unspoken frequently illuminates as much, if not more, than that which is explicitly articulated. The lacuna spanning the formative years of Jesus' life might not merely denote an absence of documentary evidence or a simple informational void. Instead, these enigmatic periods could signify a deliberate void, a realm over which ecclesiastical authority consciously elected to cast a veil of obscurity. For if Jesus truly undertook journeys beyond the confines of Judea, if his profound spiritual insights and teachings were indeed cultivated and refined through interactions with venerable spiritual masters and philosophical thinkers across Persia, the Indian subcontinent, or the Tibetan plateaus, then the foundational legitimacy and preeminence of the nascent Christian institution would undoubtedly confront an existential and deeply unsettling predicament: the formidable influence and institutional dominance of the early Church were intrinsically predicated upon the singular, unparalleled nature of its divinely inspired disclosure. Asserting that Jesus' spiritual and intellectual development occurred exclusively within the established frameworks and venerable customs of ancient Israel enabled clerical leaders to firmly tether his biography to the intricate tapestry of Old Testament prophecy and its perceived ultimate realization. This narrative effectively consolidated interpretative dominion within the grasp of those ecclesiastical figures who posited themselves as the exclusive custodians of an unadulterated, solitary truth. But if Jesus' message drew upon other spiritual sources, if his profound pronouncements resonated with the philosophical tenets of Buddhism, the ethical dualism of Zoroastrianism, or the intricate spiritual insights of Hindu mysticism, then the very concept of divine revelation would cease to be the exclusive patrimony of a single religious lineage. It would instead become a universally accessible spiritual heritage, shared across the entirety of human experience. While this perspective offers a profoundly expansive vista of spiritual understanding, it simultaneously presents an inherent challenge and a significant threat to established orders. Indeed, organizational structures and religious establishments inherently flourish by meticulously defining and rigorously enforcing strict delineations. This falls within our sacred precinct that remains beyond its pale. This constitutes undeniable truth that is unequivocally deemed error. Conversely, a portrayal of Jesus whose spiritual evolution was profoundly molded by extensive peregrinations across diverse foreign landscapes inherently dismantles these carefully constructed demarcations. Such a figure transcends localized identity, assuming a truly global resonance, becoming an untrammeled and ultimately uncontainable force. Consequently, For individuals and factions intent on constructing and maintaining rigid ecclesiastical hierarchies, this very universality represented a formidable and existential peril. It is particularly illuminating to observe that numerous apocryphal Gospels, texts deliberately omitted from the officially sanctioned scriptural collection, underscore with remarkable consistency those very tenets and narratives that fundamentally subvert established ecclesiastical power and hierarchical control. These alternative accounts frequently allude to esoteric wisdom, to the immanent divine essence residing within every individual, and to a spiritual kingdom whose dominion is not exercised by an external priestly elite, but rather is intimately apprehended and realized through profound inner discovery. To concede the premise of Jesus' extensive global travels would necessitate the acknowledgement that sagacity itself is not a commodity subject to monopolistic control or exclusive proprietorship. Such an admission would compel recognition that the divine utterance manifests through a multitude of diverse voices and across a myriad of geographical territories. Consequently, it is conceivable that this profound implication underlies the persistent veil of silence enshrouding Jesus' enigmatic, unrecorded years. The omission, therefore, might not be attributed to their perceived insignificance, but rather to their overwhelming and potentially disruptive import. To bring these years to light could have precipitated the catastrophic unraveling of the delicate ideological framework constituting early Christian orthodoxy. It was perhaps deemed strategically preferable to leave that particular parchment unscribed, to purposefully exclude those temporal segments, thereby allowing the pervasive power of silence to effectively execute the task of obfuscation. Nevertheless, the very presence of such an eloquent absence invariably stimulates profound inquiry. Thus, across successive generations, inquisitive minds and spiritual aspirants have gazed upon that historical void, daring to articulate the very questions deemed prescribed by conventional wisdom. One might ponder whether these enigmatic lacunae in his biography might, in fact, contain the crucial interpretive cipher to understanding his profoundly universal spiritual outlook. What if this very individual, who eloquently discoursed upon the ephemeral beauty of lilies and the provident care for sparrows, had also, at some juncture, absorbed the meditative chants of Buddhist monks, the sacred hymns of Zoroastrian magi, and the profound, itinerant wisdom imparted by wandering spiritual adepts. Thus, while established authority might have endeavored to stifle these narratives, the ensuing silence paradoxically transformed into a fecund substrate for imaginative speculation and mythopoetic creation. In that unwritten expanse, legends proliferated with the spontaneous vitality of wildflowers, each narrative fragment providing a tantalizing intimation of a Jesus whose spiritual allegiance extended beyond a singular ethnic or national identity, embracing instead the entirety of global humanity. And perhaps this inherent resonance explains the enduring persistence of the mystery itself, for it subtly intimates a verity of existence that transcends the limitations of temporal power, surpasses the strictures of ecclesiastical dogma, and fundamentally resists confinement to any solitary geographical representation or canonical scripture. These unrecorded periods, far from diminishing the profound impact of his narrative, might instead serve to immeasurably augment its spiritual potency. They propose that the Christ figure familiar to us was sculpted not solely within the pastoral contours of the Galilean landscape, but also by profound engagements with the broader global tapestry, thereby imbuing his message with a universal resonance that reverberates across every human culture, every spiritual tradition, and every corner of the earth. Should the mere contemplation of Jesus's conjectured eastward travels perturb conventional understanding and stir the speculative faculties of the mind, then what profound implications arise from the even more audacious murmurs suggesting his peregrinations extended considerably farther, transcending vast oceanic expanses to reach the remote continents of the Americas. For a multitude of observers, such a proposition appears utterly unfeasible, a mythical narrative extended beyond the bounds of credulity. Nevertheless, disparate oral traditions and ancient narratives preserved within Mesoamerican and Andean cultures recount the appearance of personages bearing striking resemblances to the Christ figure. The parallels are sufficiently compelling to lead some to ponder whether these persistent cultural reverberations might, in fact, obscure the memory of a long-vanished, pivotal historical encounter. Within the venerable traditions of the Nahua and Maya civilizations indigenous to Central America, compelling narratives persist concerning an enigmatic preceptor known as Quetzalcoatl, revered as the feathered serpent deity. This revered entity arrived not as an subjugating invader, but rather as a benevolent purveyor of profound wisdom and enlightened understanding. Descriptions frequently portray him as possessing a light complexion, adorned with a beard, clad in immaculate white vestments, and steadfastly advocating against the practice of human sacrifice. His teachings emphasized principles of harmony, advanced agricultural techniques, and the cultivation of various artistic disciplines before his eventual departure, accompanied by a solemn pledge of future reappearance. Similarly, throughout the majestic Andean mountain ranges, the formidable Inca Empire propagated legends of Viracocha, a commanding, bearded figure of considerable stature who reportedly materialized from beyond the expansive ocean. This divine emissary bestowed profound sagacity, exhibited remarkable powers of healing the ailing, and subsequently disappeared towards the western horizon. For a segment of scholarly opinion, these striking congruencies are merely attributable to fortuitous happenstance or represent the retrospective imposition of post-colonial Christian theological concepts onto indigenous mythologies. However, an alternative perspective prompts inquiry. Might these accounts constitute fragmented vestiges of collective memory, transmuted over countless centuries, pertaining to an itinerant spiritual guide who traversed vast maritime distances long prior to the inaugural transatlantic voyage of Christopher Columbus? Those inclined toward skepticism vehemently contend that such an epic voyage would have been utterly beyond the capabilities of ancient maritime technology. Notwithstanding these reservations, historical evidence indicates that ancient seafaring prowess was considerably more sophisticated and extensive than contemporary popular perception frequently acknowledges. Master mariners from Phoenicia and Egypt possessed an intimate understanding of the intricate patterns and profound dynamics of the open ocean. Roman mercantile vessels successfully navigated to the Indian subcontinent, strategically utilizing the predictable seasonal monsoon winds for their passage. Furthermore, the intrepid Polynesians accomplished astonishing transoceanic migrations across thousands of miles of water, relying solely upon celestial navigation and astute interpretation of ocean swells. Given the demonstrated capabilities of other ancient mariners to undertake such ambitious expeditions, Why should it be deemed implausible for a resolute spiritual aspirant, perhaps conveyed by intrepid traders or devout pilgrims, to have traversed these long-forgotten maritime routes? The profound, enigmatic significance attributed to these narratives derives not from empirical substantiation, but rather from their compelling thematic congruity. They consistently depict a benevolent personage characterized by profound compassion, vehemently opposed to ceremonial sacrifice involving bloodshed, revered as a restorative healer and an illuminating mentor, and associated with a solemn vow of future reappearance. These are archetypal motifs that echo with remarkable profundity the central tenets of the gospel narratives, yet manifest themselves conspicuously within cultural contexts geographically distant and historically disconnected from the sacred precincts of the Holy Land. Do these striking similarities merely represent universally emergent archetypes, independently generated by the pervasive human yearning for harmony and spiritual fulfillment? Alternatively, might they subtly intimate a historical interaction of such profound import that conventional historical records deliberately omitted its preservation? Furthermore, even within the distinct theological framework of the Latter-day Saints denomination in America, a significant tenet posits that subsequent to his resurrection, Christ manifested himself to the indigenous populations of the New World, imparting his teachings with the same divine authority and spiritual depth as he had previously demonstrated in Galilee. Although this particular theological conviction resides beyond the conventional parameters of mainstream historical consensus, it nonetheless encapsulates a deeply recurrent and pervasive thematic thread, namely, the profound human yearning to perceive Jesus not as geographically circumscribed to a singular territory, but rather as an omnipresent, universal voyager, manifesting wherever empathy and succor are most urgently required. The cultural reverberations discovered in the Americas, therefore, may be likened to ethereal melodies, subtly borne upon the currents of the wind. While empirical validation for their direct attribution to him remains elusive, their thematic resonance evokes a hauntingly familiar spiritual cadence. These enduring narratives serve as poignant reminders that profound narratives often traverse greater distances than physical forms, and that collective memory frequently extends across vast oceanic divides, reconfiguring its essence and expression within novel linguistic and cultural frameworks. It is entirely plausible that Jesus of Nazareth never physically traversed the lands of the Americas. Conceivably, the revered figures of Quetzalcoatl and Viracocha represent autonomous mythological constructs, profound archetypes spontaneously generated from the depths of the human psyche. Nevertheless, the persistent and compelling similarities between these narratives maintain an open portal to profound contemplation and spiritual inquiry. For what if the unrecorded periods of his early life, and even the enigmatic years following his resurrection, encompass epic peregrinations that defy our current comprehension and historical imagination? Journeys across arid deserts, over formidable mountain ranges, and perhaps even spanning immense oceanic expanses, thereby scattering indelible fragments of collective memory in locations we had never previously considered investigating. Nestled high within the rich tapestry of Tibetan and Central Asian mythologies reposes a mystical domain, so profoundly concealed and inherently elusive that its essence transcends mere geographical location, evolving into an potent symbolic representation. This legendary territory, known as Shambhala, is frequently depicted as an idyllic haven of profound sagacity, a sovereign kingdom impervious to the corrosive influences of moral decay or temporal corruption. Its presence is recorded in both venerable Buddhist and Hindu scriptures, wherein it is portrayed as a sacred refuge, where ultimate truth perseveres in an unblemished state of pristine purity. According to ancient lore, its hallowed portals remain inaccessible to those deemed spiritually undeserving, yet are said to swing open readily for individuals who pursue enlightenment with an unadulterated and sincere spiritual intention. A provocative question arises. Might the enigmatic, unrecorded years of Jesus' life potentially converge with the narrative of this most profound and mysterious mythological construct? Indeed, certain intrepid thinkers have ventured to contemplate such a possibility. For if, during his formative period, he undertook extensive travels into the majestic Himalayas, engaging in spiritual discourse with revered monks and esoteric mystics in the secluded regions of Tibet, then it is plausible that the captivating legend of Shambhala could have irresistibly beckoned him further into those recondite valleys, where dedicated spiritual aspirants devoutly believed the profoundest reservoirs of global wisdom were meticulously safeguarded. According to the ancient narratives, Shambhala is governed by a lineage of highly enlightened monarchs, profound custodians of esoteric wisdom, who subtly and clandestinely guide the spiritual evolution of humanity. The precise geographical coordinates of this elusive kingdom remain perpetually ambiguous and subject to varying interpretations. Its purported situation oscillates between the formidable peaks of the Tibetan Himalayas, the vast arid expanses of the Mongolian steppes, or occasionally within ethereal realms, attainable solely through profound mystical contemplation or visionary experience. Throughout countless centuries, intrepid explorers and spiritual pilgrims have relentlessly pursued its discovery, with some claiming fleeting glimpses of resplendent, luminous cities artfully camouflaged by towering snow-capped summits or shrouded in swirling atmospheric mists. Envision Jesus, the earnest spiritual inquirer, captivated and drawn by the subtle intimations and captivating legends surrounding such an extraordinary sanctuary. A realm where profound sagacity was not dispersed haphazardly, but rather meticulously aggregated, where the principle of universal compassion constituted the foundational legal framework, and where ultimate truth was vigilantly protected as an invaluable spiritual patrimony. Should he have indeed discovered this fabled realm, or even merely assimilated its captivating narrative, could the potent vision it presented have profoundly influenced and sculpted his own profound concept of the kingdom of heaven? The thematic congruences between these spiritual visions are undeniably arresting. Shambhala is consistently depicted as a dominion where equitable justice and profound mercy hold sway, where all forms of affliction are ameliorated, and where the eternal verity of existence transcends the ephemeral passage of time. The kingdom of God, as articulated by Jesus himself, exhibits a remarkably similar spiritual resonance and conceptual framework. It is not portrayed as a remote, dominion-exercising empire of temporal authority, but rather as an immanent, concealed reality already subtly permeating the earthly plane, discernible exclusively to those endowed with heightened spiritual perception. It is plausible, therefore, that Shambhala and the kingdom of heaven function as two distinct specular surfaces, each faithfully reflecting humanity's profound, enduring aspiration for holistic integration and a world restored to its pristine integrity. Should this indeed be the case, then the enigmatic unrecorded years may represent the crucible period during which such profound reflections were first apprehended, a pivotal epoch when the contemplative insights of the East harmoniously converged with the redemptive aspirations of the West within the nascent consciousness of a young spiritual guide, meticulously preparing for his sacred earthly vocation. Cynics might contend that Shambhala exists solely as a legendary tale, a mere figment of human inventiveness. Yet, ancient narratives and mythical accounts often possess an inherent capacity to illuminate profounder verities that transcend mere historical records. These timeless stories frequently bring to light the profound aspirations of humankind, articulating that which people instinctively feel must manifest somewhere, whether as a tangible realm on our planet or as an ethereal concept within the collective consciousness. Consequently, the intriguing conjecture persists that the Nazarene Messiah might have encountered, even if fleetingly, the enduring legend of Shambhala, thereby integrating its profound spiritual insights into his own declaration of a concealed dominion. Regardless of whether he ever physically traversed such a mystical domain, the striking congruence between these two narratives compels an inquisitive mind to contemplate if true sagacity is primarily concerned with an internal accord or resonance, rather than mere geographical coordinates. This suggests an inner clandestine kingdom, mirrored and echoed in diverse narratives spanning the globe. Viewed through this lens, Shambhala transcends its identity as a mere concealed territory, evolving instead into a potent metaphor for the enigmatic missing years, themselves a period in history largely unexplored, shrouded in an alluring mystique and radiating with boundless potential. It serves as a profound testament, a subtle reminder that periods of historical silence or narrative gaps might not signify an absence or void, but rather an exquisite sanctuary, a veritable paradise of untold experiences. The canonical Gospels recount that at the moment of Jesus' advent, distinguished scholars and spiritual leaders, known as magi, journeyed from the eastern reaches, their path illuminated by a celestial beacon. These revered figures presented precious offerings of auric metal, fragrant resin, and aromatic balm at the cradle of the infant in Bethlehem. Following this momentous encounter, they discreetly departed, retracing their steps to their native lands, their sacred pilgrimage having reached its culmination. However, an intriguing query arises: what if this foundational narrative was not, in fact, the conclusive chapter? What if, in the subsequent decades, the trajectory of this significant journey was entirely inverted? Could it be that the adult individual, whose birth they had celebrated, later embarked upon a quest to discover the very ancestral domain of these venerable magi, meticulously retracing the ancient routes trodden by those who had initially bestowed upon him such profound reverence and honor? Within the rich tapestry of Persian cultural and religious heritage, the Magi represented far more than mere itinerant wayfarers. They held esteemed positions as sacerdotal figures within Zoroastrianism, diligently safeguarding the eternal sacred flames and possessing profound expertise in celestial navigation and astrological interpretation. Their intricate cosmological understanding, which posited a perpetual, epic conflict between the forces of illumination and obscurity, alongside their fervent chants extolling veracity and equity, and their profound veneration for the hallowed element of fire, resonated powerfully within the hallowed confines of their ancient sanctuaries. meticulously preserved and revered throughout countless generations. One might therefore vividly envision Jesus during his enigmatic, unrecorded period, purposefully traversing eastward, driven by a profound impulse to locate the precise geographical origin of his first distinguished visitors. Such a hypothetical expedition would elegantly complete a profound historical and spiritual circuit. Just as a celestial beacon once guided the Magi towards the Occidental lands, so too, perhaps, the subtle, unspoken imperatives of fate or destiny might have beckoned him towards the Orient, drawing him into the very heartland, the foundational fount of their ancient and profound intellectual and spiritual traditions. It prompts one to ponder the possibility. Might he have stood within the solemn grandeur of a Zoroastrian fire temple, observing the perpetual flame ascend heavenward, its light a symbol of enduring faith, while absorbing the resonant incantations proclaiming the ultimate triumph of veracity over deception? Is it conceivable that he engaged in intellectual discourse with learned Magi scholars, delving into their profound prophecies concerning the advent of a coming Redeemer, the Saoshyant, destined to inaugurate a comprehensive renewal of the world at the eschatological juncture? The profound thematic correspondences between these ancient prophecies and his own subsequent pronouncements are undeniably compelling and noteworthy. Ancient Persia, serving as a pivotal geographical and cultural nexus, functioned as a dynamic crucible where diverse intellectual currents converged and often intertwined. Within its expansive borders, robust Jewish communities flourished, steadfastly upholding their ancestral religious convictions since their displacement during the Babylonian exile. Concurrently, Buddhist ascetics had initiated the dissemination of their spiritual doctrines along the intricate network of ancient caravan pathways. Royal courts and academic centers became vibrant hubs where erudite philosophers, skilled medical practitioners, and insightful astrologers regularly congregated. For any individual earnestly pursuing knowledge and spiritual enlightenment, this region presented itself as an invaluable repository of profound sagacity, a unique locale where the distinct intellectual and spiritual expressions emanating from both the Orient and the Occident harmoniously intermingled. Should Jesus indeed have undertaken such an eastward expedition, it is plausible that he would have assimilated the profound perception of cosmic duality and the eternal struggle between opposing forces that subsequently permeated his own doctrines. This would include his compelling vision of divine illumination piercing through profound obscurity and the liberating power of unvarnished truth to emancipate humanity. Furthermore, his articulation of a spiritual kingdom, explicitly stated as not of this temporal realm, might have discovered a profound echo, a sympathetic resonance, within the Magi's ancient and fervent anticipation of a future golden age or a renewed epoch. Disbelievers, naturally, will underscore the conspicuous absence of such narratives within the sacred texts, dismissing these elaborate conjectures as mere fanciful reveries or unsubstantiated fantasies. Nevertheless, the very presence of the Magi in the Nativity account serves as a potent reminder that Persia was, from the outset, intrinsically woven into the fabric of the foundational narrative. If these esteemed wise men could traverse vast distances westward in their earnest quest for a nascent child, what logical impediment dictates the impossibility of the adult Jesus subsequently journeying eastward, returning to their ancestral domain in pursuit of ancient wisdom amidst the hallowed glow of their consecrated flames. The hypothesized Persian nexus persists, a subtle yet discernible strand woven into the intricate tapestry of the unrecorded years. While it offers no definitive corroboration, it certainly presents a compelling suggestion. It encourages us to envision a Jesus whose life was not exclusively circumscribed by the village of Nazareth, but rather one who embarked upon extensive travels through diverse lands, where erudite astrologers and profound philosophers engaged in spirited nocturnal debates. Conceivably, the perceived silence surrounding his early adulthood was not a period of inert stillness, but rather the quiet, purposeful cadence of footsteps moving eastward, drawn inexorably towards the mystical, eternal flames of ancient Persia. To conceptualize Jesus as an itinerant figure, a seeker who traversed distant foreign territories, has historically constituted a narrative deemed profoundly perilous for the prevailing religious and political establishments. For numerous centuries, such radical propositions would not simply provoke intellectual discourse or theological contention. They frequently incited severe denunciation, enforced banishment, and even the dire consequence of immolation. To assert that the Messiah might have assimilated profound insights from the venerable sages of India, Persia, or Tibet was tantamount to positing that divine sagacity was not exclusively contained within a singular revelation, a solitary sacred text, or a specific ecclesiastical institution. This expansive notion inherently imperiled the foundational tenets of established religious authority and hierarchical power structures. The nascent Christian Church assiduously labored to meticulously safeguard and firmly entrench its authorized narrative. Ecumenical councils were periodically assembled with the explicit mandate to discern and sanction which sacred writings were deemed orthodox and acceptable, and conversely, which dissenting voices or alternative accounts were to be systematically suppressed. Consequently, numerous apocryphal gospels, enigmatic mystical pronouncements, and captivating legends detailing extensive distant travels were deliberately marginalized, unequivocally denounced, and officially stigmatized as heretical doctrines. In its unwavering endeavor to preserve doctrinal cohesion and institutional unity, the Church rigorously mandated adherence to a singular, standardized storyline for the life of Jesus. The officially sanctioned account states that Jesus was born in the Judean town of Bethlehem, spent his formative years in Nazareth, underwent baptism in the waters of the Jordan River, suffered crucifixion in Jerusalem, and subsequently experienced resurrection. This narrative strictly implies nothing further, nothing beyond these established events. However, the provocative question persists. What if a more expansive reality did, in fact, exist? What if ancient scrolls discovered in the remote monasteries of Ladakh, or enigmatic tombs unearthed in the serene valleys of Kashmir, or even subtle murmurs emanating from the venerable Persian fire temples, have meticulously preserved fragmented vestiges of an alternative narrative? A story wherein Jesus' spiritual and intellectual development was influenced not solely by the familiar landscapes of Galilee, but profoundly shaped by extensive peregrinations across the vast expanse of the ancient world. Such an expansive account would inherently render him a universal figure, a spiritual luminary belonging not exclusively to a singular religious institution, but rather to the entirety of humankind. It would possess the transformative power to dismantle established geographical and doctrinal boundaries, to challenge entrenched ecclesiastical hierarchies, and to significantly obfuscate the rigidly defined parameters of conventional orthodoxy. This precisely is why such a narrative was perceived as inherently perilous. Its danger stemmed not from an inherent untruthfulness, but from its profound and inherent uncontrollability by any centralized authority. A Jesus who had traversed the ancient and extensive network of the Silk Road could not possibly be confined within the formidable ecclesiastical and political fortifications of Rome or Constantinople. A Messiah who engaged in intellectual and spiritual dialogues with Buddhist monastics could not legitimately be monopolized or exclusively claimed by a single religious tradition. His comprehensive narrative would, by its very nature, be equally resonant and pertinent to both the Eastern and Western hemispheres, belonging intrinsically to every earnest seeker who sincerely embraced and pursued the profound path of compassion. Even in subsequent historical epochs, merely articulating the possibility of these extensive journeys invariably attracted profound suspicion and often outright censure. Adventurous explorers who asserted having encountered ancient manuscripts chronicling the life of Isa were frequently subjected to public derision and academic scorn. Erudite scholars who meticulously delineated striking thematic and philosophical correspondences between the tenets of Christianity and Buddhism were summarily dismissed as fanciful visionaries or impractical idealists. Narratives concerning the figure of Uz Asaf in Kashmir were often condemned as outright blasphemy by those who steadfastly adhered to the officially sanctioned canonical account. Despite these persistent efforts at suppression, this dangerous alternative narrative stubbornly endures. This compelling alternative narrative persists precisely because periods of historical silence are never truly devoid of content or meaning. The enigmatic missing years inherently necessitate a plausible explanation, and the boundless human imagination instinctively endeavors to populate these lacunae with journeys and experiences too captivating and profound to be simply obliterated from collective consciousness. Perhaps the inherent peril of these stories resides not so much in what they purport to disclose about Jesus, but rather in what they profoundly reveal about the innate nature of humanity itself. Our deep-seated yearning for a salvific figure who transcends all conventional divisions, who articulates wisdom comprehensible to every cultural context, and who cannot be exclusively claimed or monopolized by any singular creed, dogma, or ecclesiastical council. The enigmatic missing years of Jesus' life steadfastly remain unrecorded in canonical scripture. Yet the profound implications and potential ramifications of their possibilities continue to exert a powerful, lingering influence. For with every subtle intimation, every hushed whisper of a Jesus who embarked upon eastward travels, established power structures invariably perceive a tremor at their very foundations, and within that palpable tremor, the alternative narrative is revitalized, becoming once more profoundly dangerous, not crucially because it threatens to dismantle or obliterate existing faith, but rather because it possesses the inherent capacity to profoundly broaden and enrich its scope. The conspicuous silence surrounding Jesus' unrecorded years does not appear to be a mere happenstance or an oversight. It persists with a profound gravitas, conveying an impression of deliberate intent, as if history itself has consciously undertaken the formidable task of safeguarding a profound secret. This prompts a critical inquiry. Why does this narrative void endure so stubbornly, notwithstanding centuries of fervent speculation? and despite the proliferation of rich legends disseminated across the vast cultural landscapes of India, Tibet, and Persia. A compelling explanation can be found in the inherent dynamics of power and control. The Gospels, meticulously composed and refined during the inaugural century of the Christian era, were never conceived as comprehensive biographical accounts. Rather, they functioned as carefully constructed theological portrayals, specifically designed to corroborate and strengthen nascent Christian belief, rather than to satiate mere historical inquisitiveness. The ecclesiastical editors responsible for shaping early Christian doctrine exercised extreme circumspection in their choice of narrative elements, placing particular emphasis on pivotal events such as Jesus' nativity, his baptism, his crucifixion, and his ultimate resurrection. Occurrences that serve to firmly establish religious authority and substantiate ancient prophecies. Introducing accounts of eastward expeditions or acknowledging intellectual influences derived from foreign spiritual masters would undoubtedly have destabilized this meticulously erected theological framework. Thus, preserving a strategic silence was likely deemed the more pragmatic and less disruptive course of action. Beyond its role in maintaining ecclesiastical control, silence serves an additional, equally potent function. It intrinsically cultivates an aura of profound mystery. That which remains concealed or unarticulated frequently acquires a heightened allure and fascination, surpassing the appeal of that which is openly disclosed. The 18 enigmatic, unrecorded years of Jesus' life thus resemble a hermetically sealed chamber, an irresistible enigma that perpetually draws inquisitive seekers, compelling them to envision and speculate upon the untold wonders and experiences that might reside within its unspoken confines. For certain interpreters, this pervasive silence functions as conclusive evidence that no significant events transpired during that period, positing that Jesus remained confined to Nazareth until the commencement of his public ministry. Conversely, for a different school of thought, this very same silence serves as compelling proof of the antithesis, that something profoundly extraordinary and momentous indeed occurred, an experience or series of events so expansive and significant that it simply could not be adequately contained or fully articulated within the prescribed narrative framework of the canonical Gospels. The enduring persistence of this narrative lacuna also profoundly mirrors a fundamental aspect of human yearning and cultural identity. Across a diverse spectrum of civilizations, individuals instinctively project into this historical void the narratives that resonate most deeply with their intrinsic needs and cultural self-perception. In the spiritual landscape of India, for instance, the persistent memory of Isa serves to affirm a profound connection, asserting that Jesus embraced and traversed their sacred land. In the remote reaches of Tibet, enduring echoes of a venerable Western sage serve to corroborate the notion that their indigenous wisdom traditions extended far beyond the majestic barriers of the Himalayas. And in ancient Persia, the intrinsic link to the revered Magi serves to deepen their venerable historical and spiritual connection to his nascent life. In essence, each distinct culture endeavors to imbue the silence with its own unique reflection, thereby transforming a historical absence into a powerful sense of belonging and shared heritage. Conceivably, this profound silence has never been definitively shattered precisely for this reason. Were a conclusive historical record to be unearthed, or a long-lost gospel to miraculously surface, meticulously delineating every single detail of those enigmatic years. The captivating aura of mystery would irrevocably dissipate. The very existence of this silence, therefore, constitutes an integral component of the enduring power and appeal of his narrative. It is this deliberate narrative void that permits Jesus to retain his universal resonance, his remarkable adaptability, and his pervasive presence across a multitude of spiritual traditions, without ever being rigidly circumscribed or exclusively claimed by any single one. Consequently, the profound silence endures, not as a mere void or an absence of information, but rather as an insistent invitation. It consistently challenges each successive generation to attentively listen, to profoundly ponder, and to imaginatively conceptualize. It meticulously carves out a sacred space where the realms of spiritual faith and empirical history converge, a fertile ground where audacious speculation can harmoniously coexist with steadfast belief. It serves as a powerful reminder that the overarching narrative of Jesus is far from concluded, neither fully contained nor definitively circumscribed. Instead, it expansively unfurls across vast deserts and towering mountain ranges, permeates ancient scrolls and enduring legends, and echoes through persistent whispers that steadfastly refuse to be extinguished. Fundamentally, this profound silence functions as a veil rather than an empty chasm. It is a permeable screen that simultaneously obscures and illuminates, permitting just enough enigmatic shadow to render the accompanying light all the more captivating and irresistible. Perhaps this inherent duality is precisely why it has persevered for 2 millennia, for within its enduring mystery resides its most potent and unyielding strength. History is frequently envisioned as a transparent pane, offering an unadulterated glimpse into the veracity of bygone eras. Nevertheless, it more often manifests as an intricate veil, meticulously woven by chroniclers, sacerdotal figures, and potentates, strategically draped over occurrences to obscure as much as it illuminates. The enigmatic lacunae of Jesus' early adulthood might represent one of history's most painstakingly crafted shrouds, a fabric so diaphanous that illumination permeates it, yet simultaneously so impervious that specific details remain elusive. This delicate balance of revelation and concealment invites deeper contemplation into the narratives we accept as truth. Upon closer scrutiny, the intricate pattern of this historical veil becomes discernible. Entire decades of unexplained silence, systematically excised from the accepted narrative. References to exotic locales and venerable Eastern savants are either omitted entirely or summarily dismissed as unsubstantiated. Ancient writings that too audaciously presented alternative theological perspectives were suppressed or utterly eradicated, ensuring their disappearance from collective memory. What ultimately remains for posterity is not a comprehensive depiction, but rather a meticulously controlled image, carefully curated to bolster specific theological doctrines and reinforce existing ecclesiastical authority. This selective presentation shapes our understanding, often at the expense of a fuller, more nuanced truth. And yet, no such historical veil is ever entirely without flaw. Through its intricate weave, faint glimmers of insight invariably manage to escape, offering tantalizing hints of what lies beyond. Whispers persist of Isa in the ancient lands of India, of Uz Asaf in the serene valleys of Kashmir, and of intriguing echoes found within secluded Tibetan monasteries. These narratives may constitute the fragile threads that eluded the historical censorship. Apocryphal Gospels, such as the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Philip, preserve profound sayings that resonate with a distinct Eastern spiritual cadence, shimmering with an otherworldly wisdom. Even the canonical Gospels, when subjected to a careful and discerning reading, subtly allude to influences extending far beyond the confines of Judea. The sporadic appearance of Greek terminology, the profound imagery of universal light, and the enigmatic visitation of the Magi from the distant reaches of Persia all suggest a broader tapestry of connections. Could it be plausible that this historical veil was intentionally drawn, not because there was an absence of information, but precisely because there was an abundance of it, to safeguard a straightforward and easily digestible narrative? The inherent complexity of Jesus's potential extensive journeys and diverse experiences was deliberately obscured. To protect the burgeoning authority of the nascent church, the universal scope of his spiritual influences was intentionally muted, lest it challenge the emerging orthodoxy. The imposition of this veil was deemed essential for maintaining order and doctrinal consistency. Yet beneath its folds, the more comprehensive and multifaceted story of his life continues to stir, beckoning inquisitive minds. Perhaps the very nature of history functions in this manner universally. What humanity inherits is never the unvarnished, unfiltered truth, but invariably a version meticulously shaped by those who possess the requisite power and means to record it. This historical veil serves a dual purpose. It acts as both a mechanism of concealment and a form of protection, shielding nascent and often fragile societies from narratives deemed too disruptive or challenging to bear. Yet, persistent seekers, driven by an insatiable curiosity, invariably sense the subtle folds of this fabric, perpetually tugging at its edges, and perpetually yearning to catch a fleeting glimpse of what profound truths lie hidden behind it. In the particular case of Jesus, this historical veil might represent the most significant component of his enduring mystery. For behind its deliberate obscurity, imagination flourishes without constraint. Behind its silent expanse, diverse cultures across the globe claim him as an integral part of their own heritage and spiritual lineage. Behind its enigmatic presence, the missing years assume an infinite spectrum of possibilities, allowing for profound contemplation. Without the existence of this veil, perhaps his story would feel more circumscribed, more confined to a specific time and place. With it, however, his narrative expands exponentially, stretching across every conceivable horizon, becoming a boundless source of inspiration. Therefore, when engaging in discourse about the missing years, one is not merely referring to an absence of historical record. One is, in essence, speaking of the veil of history itself, a meticulously drawn and deliberate construct, extending an unspoken invitation to wonder and ponder. And perhaps this was always the underlying intention. For certain profound truths are not meant to be unequivocally handed down with absolute certainty, but rather glimpsed tantalizingly within an aura of mystery, just beyond the delicate folds of the historical fabric, shimmering like ethereal light filtering through finely woven threads. This ambiguity fosters a deeper, more personal engagement with the narrative. Mystery, far from being an impediment, serves as a profound invitation. The profound silence surrounding the missing years does not hermetically seal the door to understanding. Instead, it leaves it tantalizingly ajar, beckoning inquisitive minds to step through its threshold. Each compelling legend, each fragmented piece of evidence, each hushed whisper of a hidden journey acts as an alluring thread, drawing the seeker deeper into the intricate labyrinth of wonder and speculation. This journey of discovery is as much about the seeker's inner landscape as it is about external historical facts. For some individuals, this pervasive mystery ignites a sense of skepticism. They perceive in it a direct challenge to established faith, a disquieting suggestion that the revered Jesus of traditional narratives is inherently incomplete or lacking. However, for others, this very absence becomes imbued with a sacred quality. It provides the narrative with ample room to breathe, to expand beyond rigid dogma, and to connect profoundly with ancient wisdom traditions that extend far beyond the geographical and cultural confines of Judea, fostering a more universal understanding. The mystery surrounding Jesus' formative years transforms the humble carpenter's son into a truly universal figure, whose profound compassion and teachings might have been profoundly shaped by transformative encounters across vast deserts, towering mountains, and expansive seas. Every unanswered question becomes an unexpected opening, an invitation to explore new avenues of thought. Could the profound Sermon on the Mount subtly carry echoes of ancient Buddhist sutras, reflecting shared spiritual insights? Could the allegorical parables of seeds and hidden treasures recall similar metaphorical narratives from the rich philosophical traditions of India? Could the powerful imagery of light and darkness, so central to his teachings, reflect the ancient fire hymns and dualistic cosmology of Persia? Each tantalizing possibility invites profound contemplation, not with the intention of definitively resolving the matter, but rather to enter a sacred space of imaginative exploration. This pervasive mystery also extends an invitation for introspection. For if the kingdom of heaven truly resides within, as the profound Gospel of Thomas suggests, then perhaps the significance of the missing years lies less in their geographical locations and more in their spiritual resonance, urging an internal journey of discovery rather than an external one. They serve as a potent reminder that silence itself is a profound teacher, that what remains unsaid or unrecorded can guide and enlighten us just as powerfully and meaningfully as what has been meticulously documented. In this manner, the missing years transform into a reflective mirror. They reflect back not only an expanded understanding of who Jesus might have been, but also a deeper insight into who we are as relentless seekers of truth and meaning. Do we, as individuals, crave absolute certainty, desiring history to present us with an entirely complete and unbroken record? Or are we prepared to embrace the invitation of mystery, acknowledging the profound possibility that truth itself may be too vast and multifaceted to be fully captured within any single, definitive account? Perhaps this inherent ambiguity is precisely why the story of Jesus endures across millennia, because in its very gaps and lacunae, it ceaselessly calls to us. It invites us to actively join the journey, to traverse the hidden roads of imagination, and to wonder with open hearts what profound truths might lie beyond the veil of established tradition. It implores us to lean into the profound silence and to discern what subtle whispers resonate there, echoes of distant ancient lands, of forgotten scrolls brimming with wisdom, of buried knowledge patiently awaiting rediscovery by an open mind. Mystery does not diminish the profound story of Jesus. Rather, it exponentially expands it. It stretches his narrative from the humble confines of Nazareth to the majestic peaks of the Himalayas, from the familiar shores of Galilee to the distant, awe-inspiring Andes, from the realm of verifiable history into the boundless domain of enduring legend. And in this expansive stretching, the story becomes precisely what it was always meant to be: a living, breathing mystery, timeless in its appeal, boundless in its scope, and perpetually unfolding, never to be fully or definitively told. Thus, as we attentively follow these elusive whispers, let us not embark on a quest for final, definitive answers. Let us instead wholeheartedly embrace the profound invitation that mystery extends, for it is within this very mystery that the story finds its living breath, and within the profound silence, the journey of discovery continues unabated. The missing years of Jesus remain unwritten, their scrolls hidden from view, his footsteps unrecorded by conventional history. What we are left with are intriguing fragments, hushed whispers, and captivating legends, echoes resonating from the ancient lands of India, Tibet, Persia, and even the faraway, enigmatic Americas. These do not provide us with absolute certainty, but they do offer us the invaluable gift of possibility. And possibility itself is the fertile seed from which all genuine inquiry blossoms. What, then, will you choose to do with this profound silence? Some may opt to dismiss it entirely, content with the narrative as it has been conventionally transmitted through generations. Others, however, will lean closer, listening intently to the gaps in the story, as if they were resonant voices, diligently searching for deeper meanings, perhaps deliberately buried beneath layers of omission. The choice, ultimately, is yours, for history is not merely what is explicitly told to us. It is also, and perhaps more importantly, what we courageously dare to seek out for ourselves. Perhaps you will mentally trace the ancient routes of the Silk Road, vividly imagining the Galilean walking alongside seasoned merchants and contemplative monks, engaging in profound discussions. Perhaps you will envision him entering a secluded monastery, engaging in philosophical debates with wise sages under the soft, flickering light of oil lamps. Or perhaps you will simply picture him wandering the serene hills of Judea, finding the very silence itself to be his most profound teacher, guiding his spiritual awakening. Each such vision represents a distinct path, and each path reveals as much about the individual seeker and their inner landscape as it does about the historical figure being sought. The enduring allure of the missing years is not that they will ever be definitively solved or neatly explained, but rather that they serve as a constant, powerful reminder of how much remains perpetually unknown in the grand tapestry of existence. Every human life, even that of the most influential figures, contains its own unique silences. Every story, no matter how extensively documented, possesses its hidden chapters, waiting to be discovered. To honor those silences is to humbly accept that truth is often far grander and more expansive than what conventional history can ever fully encompass, larger than what can be meticulously written down in any single book or collection of texts. So, let the inherent mystery draw you not towards definitive answers, but rather towards a boundless sense of wonder and inquiry. Engage with the canonical Gospels, but also explore the rich tapestry of apocryphal texts. Listen attentively to the legends emanating from Tibet and Kashmir. but also to the profound silence that lies between them. For it too holds wisdom. Ask questions not with the aim of arriving at absolute certainty, but with the purpose of awakening a deeper, more profound sense of curiosity within your soul. For perhaps the true essence of the missing years is not to definitively reveal Jesus' geographical locations, but rather to gently remind us that the very act of searching, the journey of inquiry itself, is sacred. In the final analysis, the journey belongs uniquely to you. The path of inquiry is yours to traverse, just as the hidden roads may once have been his. What you will ultimately discover is not a conclusive answer, but rather a profound opening. A sacred space where faith and imagination gracefully converge, where history and legend inextricably intertwine, and where the silence itself transforms into an invaluable guide, leading you further along your spiritual quest. Let the mystery remain, for it is precisely within this mystery that the story endures, not as a neatly solved puzzle, but as a vibrant, living question. A question that whispers across centuries, inviting each and every one of us to embark upon our own hidden road, perpetually seeking what lies just beyond the horizon of conventional understanding.